braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Rum links, 2, 3, rum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil dich ein in die Arbeit einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil dich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil dich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is where we watch the real far left. I'm not talking about the Democrats that gathered in Chicago that we watched all week because, as we know, because we actually watched the far left, unlike every GD conservative commentator on the goddamn internet, we know that the real far leftists were outside protesting the DNC last week. We know the real socialists, the real communists are not Kamala Harris. They're not Tim Walz. They're not any of those people that were on stage at the DNC. Some of those people might occasionally support things that they like, but the fact of the matter is that the real socialists and communists were protesting the DNC because the real socialists and the real communists hate the Democrats way more than they hate Republicans. And I don't know why my sound does not look synced up with my mouth. Is this just me, or is anyone else having this experience? Why does my sound not look synced up with my mouth? What's going on? Hey, whatever. It's not bad enough for me to worry about, quite frankly. I probably need to restart my computer or something. That's probably what needs to happen. That's not going to happen right now. As long as you can see me and you can hear me, doesn't matter if it's perfectly synced up. Yeah, it is a little weird, isn't it? It is a little weird. Hang on one sec. Is this better? Is this better? It looks, yeah, I think it's better. I think maybe it's better. It is fixed. Excellent. See, wasn't that so easy? Wasn't that so easy? Now we're good. All right. Now we can get down to business. Because we've got a lot of business to tend to today, guys. If you have never been to Socialism Saturday before, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. Now people are saying it's fixed. See, sometimes you just need to turn something off and turn it back on. And that's all that's required. You just need to turn it back off and turn it on. So, I may have gathered a little bit of wisdom in my years on this planet, those years obviously being 29 in number and not a single year more. But you just can't beat turning something off and turning something back on, as it turns out. All right, guys, we have got a really full docket today. We are going to be returning to Red May. And so we started this a couple weeks ago. We watched the first episode. They've done a 3-part series called Marxism and the Capitalist State. Red May are, of course, radical revolutionary socialists out of Seattle. These are like the same people that did the Chaz and stuff like that. And Red May is an organization that every single year during the month of May, they host all sorts of lectures and movies and talks about socialism and stuff like that. And we're very lucky that they stream a lot of that stuff on the internet for us. Well, I have to admit, this past year's Red May was a little lackluster for me. I think Philip was sick or something. I don't know what was going on. Philip seemed to not be on his game. Philip is our favorite Columbia graduate who is the head of Red May. And I don't know, there was just something that it wasn't great this year. It wasn't. I was very disappointed in Philip, but we are still very lucky in that Red May does bring us other content throughout the year. And they've done this 3-part series for us called Marxism and the Capitalist State. This one featured the most handsome of all socialists, Sean. So we always love when Sean makes an appearance. It looks like Sean is in tonight's episode as well. So that makes me very happy. We will be continuing with part 2 of this series. And if you missed part 1, from a couple weeks ago, I wouldn't really worry about it. This is not one of those things where it's like the first episode of a TV show and then we go to the second episode. You can kind of jump right into the middle and you're going to get just as much benefit from watching it. So I wouldn't worry too much about it if you weren't here for the first one, but we will be watching the second one today, which is also called Marx and the Capitalist State. But let's see if they have a description. They have no description. So we're going in blind, but it does seem like they're going to be talking about the Supreme Court. As you guys know, socialists do want to abolish the Supreme Court. They perceive the Supreme Court to be an unelected body of people that do not serve the average American, but instead serve the bourgeois, the private property owners, Trump himself in this case. So we're going to be watching this episode and we are going to see what's what. But guess what, guys? Before we jump into that, I have a couple of announcements. Now, number 1. It is almost the end of the month, and I can't effing believe this. We are almost in the month of September. I feel like I say this every year, but I had so much more stuff I wanted to do this year. I've got a campus. I want to do a campus flyer campaign this year. I've got all sorts of stuff I want to do with the Unwoke zine project. There's so much shit that I wanted. I cannot believe it's September already. But we can't worry about that right now. Let me put on my glasses to look studious. We can't worry about that right now because one of the most important things that happens at the end of August, the beginning of September, is the infamous Socialism Conference. Now, those of you who've been around for a year will recall that I went to the Socialism Conference last year in Chicago. I had to go under a fake name and pretend I was non-binary and wear a chest binder and everything. And I recorded them doing a number of different things. Among other things, I recorded the president of the then president of the American Library Association saying that libraries should be sites of Marxist organizing. You may have seen that on the news somewhere, even if I didn't get credit for it, because God knows a lot of people stole it. That did actually come from me. I sat in a room for 3 days with 400 radical revolutionary socialists, many of whom were in Antifa, and I listened to everything they had to say for 8 hours a day just to get those beautiful little moments. Well, I made an executive decision that it was probably a little too dangerous for me to go back to Chicago this year. First off, because they preemptively banned me from the conference last year. Before the conference even happened, I got an email from them saying I wasn't welcome at the conference. Of course, I ignored that email and I went anyway. But it's just one of those things where it's like, you don't want to tempt fate a little bit. Like, you don't want to tempt fate. And I just felt like it was going to be more prudent and more practical for me to stay home this year and to not put myself in that level of danger, because I'm fairly certain I would have get the shit beat out of me. That's not to say I don't know people who are going. I do know people who are going. Just so we're clear. I absolutely know people who are going. But we still get to have our fun too, because look at this. They're streaming a whole bunch of sessions. They're starting to stream sessions on Friday the 30th. And that's going to be an evening session. They're going through a whole bunch on the 31st, a whole bunch on the 1st, And I think that's it. So we got all these sessions. So we've got Friday the 30th. I believe that's Saturday the 31st, and then Sunday the 1st. We've got a whole lot of socialism that we can watch. And if you think I'm not watching this stuff live, well, you guys just don't know me, right? So we're going to do it live. We might not get our whole pick of the litter in terms of every single presentation that's going to be at the Socialism Conference, but I feel like they've given us some good stuff to work with. And then hopefully the spies that are going to the Socialism Conference will be able to go to the sessions that are not being broadcast live on the internet. Of course, they do actually record all of these sessions. They will be releasing all of these sessions at some point, but I feel like we've got some stuff to work with, and we can have a couple marathon socialism days. So here's what my plan is. We're going for it. We're going to dig in. I'm streaming that session on Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday, we're going to be binge watching socialism all day. It will be socialism weekend. So hopefully a lot of people will show up for it. People are going to be excited. You guys are going to get to see just how hard it is to sit through 8 hours a day of socialism. I promise you, it's not the most fun thing I've ever done. But you will learn a lot. We will hear a lot of the quiet part out loud. Remember, this is their private event that they're showing us live on the internet. But when you're actually there, you don't think about the fact that the cameras are rolling. You think about the fact that you're in a room full of socialists. And these socialists are talking to each other. They're not talking to people like us. They are talking to each other about their plans, about how they're organizing, about how they're going to be fighting back on a lot of issues. And I got to tell you, like, I'm kind of glad I went last year and not this year, because it seems to be all Palestine this year. Palestine, genocide, Zionism, imperial feminism. That'll be an interesting one. Capitalism and abolition. Let's see. Palestine, Audre Lorde. This is about unions. This is about borders. Political economy of COVID. Who knows what that is going to be? Don't know what that's about. Lenin, Green New Deal. Don't know what this is about. Hang on. June Jordan! Bought. They have... Bought. Does the name June Jordan ring a bell to you? Check this out. They've got a whole session about June Jordan. I guess it was my destiny to live so long exploring the work of June Jordan. I'll show you why I know the name June Jordan. Because earlier this year, Bot uncovered this. This was like a research rabbit hole that Bot went down. Bot discovered that the June Jordan School of Equity in San Francisco was openly violating California state privacy law and also federal privacy law by putting their student records live on the internet. And we found them when we downloaded them. We exposed their ass, and they took their entire website offline just because of us. That is the legacy of June Jordan. And by the way, you didn't hear that from anywhere else, because Bot found that. And we blew that shit up, and we made them take their website offline. So that's going to be another session, apparently. June Jordan. Let's see what else they have. I can't even figure out my tabs right now. Let's see. Building on the mass. Okay, so this is going to be an important one. Dare to Win, building on the mass protest decade. And then Sunday School, Revolutionary Love. We're not going to be able to do all of these sessions because some of them are overlapping, guys, but we are going to be able to do a lot of them. And I'm really looking forward to next weekend. We are going to be doing a full socialism weekend. I hope you guys are here for it. I may even get drunk on the internet again. That might be, although I find watching socialism at least to be more entertaining than I find watching the DNC. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but that's what I think. Hey, Nick, you missed the accent. Well, you know, Nick, I appreciate the super chat. You never know. You never know when the accent might come back. We can't force the accent, though. The accent has to come on its own. Can't do it all the time. It has to just happen. These things have to be organic, all right? So thanks for that super chat. Nick has started us off. We do have a $100 super chat goal for the stream. That's pretty typical of my streams, just to make sure that my time is taken care of. Guys, if you appreciate what I'm doing in terms of showing you stuff that no one else on the internet is showing you, breaking down the language of the far left, stuff like that, send in a $5 super chat. 20 of you send in $5 super chats. We've already met our goal, and I would really appreciate it. Now we can see you, bro. We can see you over on X. We can see you. We can see you. Couple other announcements now. I know I may have been a bit of a tease yesterday. Yesterday on Twitter, I said, should I premiere my new show, Something Controversial, for a Fascism Friday? And then people were waiting up for me to premiere my show. And I felt a little bit bad because I think I saw Sin. Sin was like, Carlin, I've been waiting around for an hour. And I was like, Sin, I didn't say I was going to do it for sure. I just said I might do it. But I didn't stream yesterday. I wasn't hungover. Like some people, I really wasn't hungover. I was just tinkering around because I want to do I'm premiering a new show. I'm going to tell you about it in a second. First, I'm going to thank Honest Dog Allison for that super sticker. Thank you, Honest Dog Allison. I appreciate you. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten about you and the zine stuff. It's just the year has gotten away from me. And I know you understand because you're an artist and you understand these things. And I appreciate that. Anyway, so I have this new show that I'm going to be premiering. And it's going to be a Rumble exclusive. And everyone should subscribe to my Rumble channel, which is carlin.com/Rumble. I may also put it on Kick as well, just because I don't stream on Kick, but I might just put it on Kick just because. I don't know. We're going to try it out. Anyway, the reason that that I was offline yesterday is I'm trying to get an entirely new kind of like streaming setup for this, where I'm not going to be using StreamYard like I use on YouTube. I'm going to be using a different tool so that like when people send in super chats, it reads it on the screen and all that stuff, and I can have goals, and it basically has much more functionality than StreamYard does. The problem is I'm stupid when it comes to technology. I may be smart about very many things, but something happened like 5-6 years ago. I used to be good at technology, and then I hit a certain age, which is, of course, 29. I hit 29 5 or 6 years ago, and all of a sudden, I didn't know anything about technology anymore. And I became stupid with regards to technology. But I dug deep. And yesterday, all day, I was tinkering around with this new streaming setup, and I think I've gotten it working. And so we will be premiering this new show. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is Streamlabs. Yeah, it is. Yeah, but I don't know how to use this shit, and I had to learn it all from scratch. Okay, don't judge me. I don't know how to use it. I tried asking Beardson for help. Beardson didn't have time, and he had a toothache or something like that, which I appreciate. And he said he would help me, and maybe he still will. I don't know. There's still some questions I have, but I think I may have figured it out on my own. It just took all day. And so there is a very good chance that I will be doing kind of like a test stream, maybe late tonight, maybe tomorrow, to try to tinker with some of this stuff and figure it out and see if I've got it working. Yeah, I mean, like once I kind of just like, I feel like I've gotten it pretty figured out, but just like getting it all set up. And then I tried to do Power Chat Live with it because all the Groypers said, Carlin, you have to get on Power Chat Live. And I was like, fucking fine. I'll get on Power Chat Live. And I had to figure out how it all worked. And there's no instruction manual for this stuff because apparently no one knows how to write an instruction manual. Anyway, I think I figured it out. And so I will be premiering the show sometime this week, maybe even later tonight. And if you want to come and join me, just make sure you subscribe to the Rumble channel. We're just going to see how it goes. And the whole point of this show is that I'm going to be watching the most banned videos on the internet. I've got a whole metric long list of videos from things about World War II and Hitler to things about the moon landing to things about flat Earth to things about I've got Jew videos for days. I have every banned topic that you can the Talmud. I want to do a whole series on the Talmud. I'm going to watch every banned video that people send me, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to figure out what I believe, and I'm going to figure out what I think is real, and I'm going to figure out what I think is not real. And I can't do this on YouTube for obvious reasons. I do not want to lose my YouTube channel. But what I am willing to do is to make it a Rumble exclusive and to maybe throw it up on Kick as well, just to see what happens. And talk about some banned video topics on the internet. And I'm not saying I agree with everything I'm going to watch, because obviously I haven't watched it yet. I have no idea whether I agree or not. But I do think it's going to be a little bit of an interesting exercise for us. It's going to allow me to delve into some controversial topics, and I think people are going to enjoy it. And people are going to be able to suggest videos for me to watch. And I feel like I've got a pretty open mind about some of this stuff. I feel like some of it will probably get me in trouble. But listen, if we're not allowed to consider ideas on the internet, then I don't even know what the F we're doing here. Anyway, so make sure you subscribe to my Rumble channel for that. My Rumble channel is rumble.com/Carlyn, Karlyn. And make sure you also join my Telegram. My Telegram is t.me. Hang on. T.me/UnwokeX. There we go. Put the link in the chat. Make sure you join my Telegram. I will send out a notification of when I do go live on for that show. Going live anytime, so you guys can come and join me. And we can see what's what. I'm gonna probably try streaming it to Twitter too, just to see if I get banned for that. I guess we'll see. I don't know. We'll do some experiments to see how far I can push things. But that's going to be coming up possibly as soon as tonight if I really get my shit together. But maybe tomorrow as well. I do want to do a test stream, and please just be gentle with me for the test stream. Okay, I'm using a new streaming setup. I'm old. I don't know how to do this stuff. I'm doing the best I can. You guys are gonna have to help me along. All right, we're gonna make it through it. All right, let's see. What else do I have? That's that. Oh, lastly, second to lastly, please make sure you are subscribed to my Substack. That is Carlyn, Karlyn. Substack.com. No, I will not be watching snuff films, Human Centipede. Don't put that evil on me. That's where you can find my my breakdowns of what the far left is doing. And of course, last chance for your DNC specials in the Unwoke Art merch store. We, of course, have these 8 new designs that I've launched in the Unwoke Art store this week. And these designs are going to stay in the store because I quite frankly really like all of them. And I think they're all really cool. But after tomorrow, you're not going to be able to get them on sale anymore. So right now, the sale is 10% off all merch with these designs on them, these specific designs. And then if you spend over $100 or more in the merch store, you're going to get 25% off your whole order. And that's for anything in the merch store. So here's our designs. We've got our Socialism skull. All these shirts do come in multiple colors. It comes on other types of merch too, but I'm just showing it to you on the t-shirts. We've got Socialists Always Lie. Perfect for Socialism Saturday. Comes in all sorts of different colors, light colors, dark colors, pretty colors. We've got this Whiteness Means Capitalism Andy Warhol inspired soup can, which look awesome on every color because pop art does look awesome on every color. We've also got this Marilyn Monroe Whiteness Means Capitalism because I made it by accident and I thought it was really cool. So we've got that. We've got Equity is Marxism. Of course, every time you hear the word equity, including at your kid's school district, they are teaching Marxism to your kids. We've got Men Are Not Women because apparently we need to state the obvious out loud now because it couldn't be more clear. Also, gender is binary. There are only 2 genders. They are men and they are women. Also things we need to teach because the public schools are teaching the opposite. And then, of course, gender is not queer. Queer, of course, is a far left political ideology. All of these designs are available in the Unwoke Art store. And if you click View All on the homepage, you'll see I've got them in prints. I've got them in hoodies with the designs on the back. I've got them in sweatshirts. I've got them in pint glasses. I've got them in mugs. The mugs are a big hit so far. I appreciate everyone who's ordered that. We've got normal hoodies with the design on the front. And by special request, someone asked me to make tank tops. And so I made those too. And so those are the special edition collection in the Unwoke Art store. Again, the designs will remain in the store after this week, but you will only be able to get them on sale through Sunday, so through midnight tomorrow. So get your purchases in. And if you don't, you can still buy the stuff. You're just going to have to pay me more money for it. I can't wait to get some of these designs, though. I'm really looking forward to that. Socialism skull is like awesome. I'm very impressed with myself about that. You like them all? I really appreciate that because you are actually a professional designer. I just dabble, and sometimes I make cool stuff. It turned out good though, right? Anyway, that's all I've got, guys. We're gonna dig right into it. Please do make sure you mount the like button for me. Is anyone new? Is anyone a Socialism Saturday newbie? Please chat in and let me know if you are a Socialism Saturday newbie. It's okay to be new. Nothing wrong with being new. It's just very helpful for us to know if you're new. No, do not say you're new if you're not new. If you say you're new when you're not new, I'm going to time you out. We might not have any new people. Maybe we're all veterans. You're not sure, Bruce? You're not sure? Okay. All right. If you are new, first off, welcome. You're going to learn more about what is going on the radical revolutionary far left than anywhere else on the internet. I will show you what the real far left says. I will show you what their strategies are. I will teach you their language, because the far left does use a different language than us. They may use the same vocabulary as us. They do not use the same dictionary as us. Part of the point of watching socialism is not just to own the libs. It's not just to make fun of them. The point is to learn the language that they're using so that we can understand how it shows up in the real world. People who've been watching socialism with me for 1 year, 2 years, some people have been watching this for like 3.5 years with me now. Once you become fluent in the language of socialist, you start to see it everywhere. And your mind will be blown in ways that you have no clue of yet. How many tentacles this monster has its hands in. It really is a little bit frightening when you get into it. You have to treat Socialism Saturday as a class. We do have fun, we play, we banter in the chat, nothing wrong with that. However, at the end of the day, this is a class and this is a research group, all right? I am the teacher of the class. You are the students in the class. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like my tone. You don't have to like the things I say. But if you don't like them, don't become disruptive in the chat. Just leave. Go somewhere else. You don't have to be here, okay? The point of this is that there are a lot of people who watch the stream that do want to learn, and I'm going to create an environment that I believe is conducive to learning. I ask everyone to please refrain from shitposting. Please refrain from debunking every single thing the socialists say, because debunking doesn't actually solve the problem. And every time you put energy into debunking what they say, you go, that's stupid, or real socialism hasn't been tried. Do you really think we haven't heard that before? We've been watching socialism on this channel for years. Every single time you debunk, you are taking energy away that you could be putting into understanding your enemy. Because if you do not understand your enemy, you will lose to them. There is no way to beat an enemy that you do not understand. If I have 2 rules in my chat. Number 1, don't be a dick. Do not insult me. Do not insult other people in my audience. And that's just the way it goes. You can insult the people on the screen. I don't really care. But we're gonna create an environment that's nice for everyone. If you want to have an emotional outburst, you can go somewhere else. Number 2, no whining. I don't want to hear it. I am not your mommy. I am not going to coddle your feelings. I quite frankly don't care how you feel. If I ask you to stop doing something, please stop doing it. If you do not stop doing it, the first thing I'm going to do is give you a timeout. The second thing I'm going to do is going to ban you from the chat entirely. I ban people every single stream who don't listen and who want to test this. And then those people go crying on Twitter like, I can't believe you banned me on that stream. Well, did you do the thing I told you not to do? Don't fucking test my limits. Because I will just like, we will remove you. All right. Anyway, we're going to be watching this presentation from Red May. Again, if you just joined, Red May is a radical revolutionary socialist organization in Seattle. This is part 2 of a 3-part series they did. Don't worry if you missed the first one. It's going to be okay. And we're going to hear what real radical revolutionary leftists say. Please make sure you've mounted that like button for me. Mounting the like button lets YouTube know to recommend my content to more people. And so, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this Socialism Saturday. Oh, why am I gay? Why am I gay? Why are you banned? See, guys, this is the type of stuff that will get you pretty much instantly banned on my channel. Goodbye, Anthony. Anthony doesn't even get a warning. I don't know why we attract those types of I don't know why we attract that type of stuff. I really don't. I really don't get it. I really don't understand why people waste their time being subscribed to the channel for 5 minutes just to say nonsense. It's going to get them banned, but here we are. Anyway, let's dig in. Sean!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Red May. I am Sean,
The most handsome
your
of all
host for
socialists.
today, your moderator. This is part 2 of Marxism and the capitalist state towards a new debate. This is based on a book that came out from Paul Grave last year. I cannot recommend it enough. It is chock full of excellent thoughts.
Sean has a chest tattoo.
Excellent discussion, open-ended inquiry as much as
I wonder if we
really
would ask
rigorous
Sean really
analysis,
nicely if he would show us his tattoo.
of the relationship between Marxism and the capitalist state.
Hang on. Why ban someone you don't like who asks questions you don't like? Because this is my fucking class, David. This is my class. I am the teacher in the class. Everyone that chooses to be here is a student in the class. If someone comes into my chat and says, "Why are you gay?" That's not a question I'm going to take seriously. That's not a question I'm going to answer with intelligence. And if you continue to disrupt my chat over on Twitter, I'll just go over there and ban you too, bro. I doubt it's a Baphomet tattoo.
Today we are joined by Alyssa Battistoni and Rob Hunter. Rob is one of the editors of the book with Raphael Kachachurian and
ban disruptive
Eva
people
Nanopoulos,
always.
and Alyssa is a contributor. I mentioned this last time, but I think it's worth mentioning again. Last year, many of the writers and contributors to the book project did a talk with the Marxist Education Project. A great group. You should support them, follow them in their work, and join in their discussions. But for this talk that everybody was doing, I was working in the warehouse that day, got in there first, so I got to choose what we listened to. And all my coworkers were at first not all that excited to be listening to a lecture series on a Saturday morning. But by the end of it, we were going back and forth. They were really excited by the inquiry and the questions. They were kind of animated about the Q&A section. And then we went out afterwards, got some drinks, and chatted about it. And so it's worth noting that anybody can pick this book up. Anybody can find these topics fascinating, worthwhile, and interesting to their own lives and circumstances. So I really, really recommend sharing Marxism and the capitalist state towards a new debate with people in your life. You might be pleasantly surprised by the contemporary effects by Marxist analysis on people's everyday experience. So today I'm going to introduce Alyssa and Rob. Then they're going to do some talks and presentations, followed by a little discussion between the two of them. And then we're going to break out into Q&A. Feel free to send in questions, comments, etc. through the YouTube chat. You can also send us anywhere like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
David, I now have my Twitter up, which means that if you keep asking questions in my chat that have nothing to do with what's going on, you're going to be removed rather quickly. So I ask that people stay focused on the presentation. If you're not focused on the presentation, I don't know what you're doing here.
Email, text me, send me a postcard, like whatever you got to do. If it's on your mind, let us know. So today we have Alyssa Battistoni. Alyssa is an assistant professor of political science at Barnard College. Her academic work has been published in Political Theory, Perspectives on Politics, and Contemporary Political Theory. She writes frequently for publications including New Left Review, The Nation, Dissent, N+1, Boston Review, and Jacobin. Alyssa is the co-author of A Planet to Win, Why We Need a Green New Deal. Actually, we did a Red May event for this book when it came out with Alyssa here in Seattle. It was very exciting, huge turnout. Read that if you haven't yet. And her next book is titled Free Gifts, Capitalism and the Politics of Nature. We're also joined by Rob Hunter. Rob is a member of the Legal Forum editorial collective. His theoretical writing can be found on the Legal Forum blog, Science and Society, Yale Journal of Law and Humanities, as well as Boundaries.
Anytime you guys hear the term collective, that's a term for socialist organizing, almost always. I've run into maybe like one or two cases where the term collective was used when it wasn't used in that way, but like 99% of times, if you hear the word collective, that means far left radical revolutionary socialist organizing. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're either here to learn or you're going to get the fuck out. Why does this always happen? I don't understand. Is this fucking difficult? Are people just too fucking low IQ for this stuff? I really wonder. I really wonder if the internet is actually high enough IQ to be able to understand what's going on here.
To online, and as polemics can be found in publications like Jacobin, Broken Rail, The Guardian, and Peste. I think Rob is going to go first, followed by Alyssa. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and let's enjoy.
Okay, thank you, Sean, and a big thanks to everyone at RedMay for organizing this and all of the hard work that they've been putting into it. We really appreciate it, and it's great to be here. And thank you as well to everyone who is tuning in or who is watching the recording. And really excited to be here today, talking to Alyssa and talking to everyone else. And I think it's going to be a great discussion. So let me just begin briefly by describing not the book as a whole, but my chapter, and perhaps we'll have some opportunities to talk about the book as a whole later. But my chapter is an argument for why we should think of the capitalist state as the political form of appearance of capitalist social relations. So I argue that the capitalist state is best understood as...
So just for anyone that's new, when they say the capitalist state, well, I'll ask this as a pop quiz. When they say the capitalist state, what do they mean? Because we need to make sure to bring our new people along. I know that there were people here who weren't here last time that you may never have heard. If you haven't watched Socialism before, you may have never heard this term. What does the capitalist state mean? I'm just waiting for some answers to come in. I see a couple wrong answers, one close answer. Yasmin in with the gold star. All right. This is not related to the fucking video. David, sit back, shut the fuck up, and listen. If you do not have questions that are directly related to this video, I don't want to hear from you. Always with the retarded conservatives. Always. Every single fucking time. However, Yasmin is not a retarded conservative. Yasmin knew the answer to the question. When they say the capitalist state, they mean America. They mean the United States government. It is very, very specific. That is what they are referring to when they say the capitalist state. It's not just an economic model. And I appreciate my new friend on Twitter actually engaging in the conversation. It's not just an economic model. Socialism is a cultural model. It is, and they said this in the last time. I have a clip of it that I'll put up at some point. But when they say socialism or capitalism, they are not talking about an economic model. They are talking about society. They're talking about the people. They're talking about the culture. If you think that socialism is an economic model, you have had horrible teachers about what socialism is, because it is so much more than that. Let's see. Let's go back to some of our other answers. Well, it is the bourgeois, but specifically the capitalist U.S. government. Capitalism is defined as private property ownership, but that's not what it means here. Yeah, I mean, he's going to get banned in basically the next time he talks, I think. See, Offensive Saint knows the capitalist government is the United States government. America is the capitalist government. All right. S over on Twitter asks, does that include the G7 countries? No. I mean, okay, let me rephrase. If the presentation were focused on a more international globalist perspective, it certainly would include those countries. However, the people that we focus on are talking about socialism in the United States. So in the context of this presentation and in the context of what socialists in America care about, they care about the United States. But socialists are globalists. Make no mistake, they want all borders to be gone. They believe that borders only enforce private property ownership. As a reminder for people who are new, capitalism is defined as private property ownership specifically. It's not crony capitalism. It's not corrupt capitalism. It's not any of those things. Vivek Ramaswamy should have listened to me before he went and interacted with those socialists this week, because he was talking. Vivek Ramaswamy this week. Vivek Ramaswamy. Okay, David, you're getting banned. Goodbye. Not fucking cool. I don't know why I need to even deal with these people. Goodbye, David. Vivek Ramaswamy this week was interacting with communists outside of the DNC, and he said to them, he was like, I'm sure you and I have a lot of things in common, and, we both believe that crony capitalism and corrupt capitalism are wrong. And I was like, Vivek, they don't mean crony capitalism or corrupt capitalism. They mean private property ownership. They do not have the same definition of capitalism as you do.
An historically specific social form, one that is peculiar to capitalism. In other words, there's a state that we, as capitalist subjects, encounter today, and this state is not simply a particular example of a more general category, a more generic category called states in general. Instead, it's the distinctive and peculiar political form of a distinctive and peculiar form of society, a society that is characterized by and dominated by the accumulation of capital. So in this view, the state's apparent separation from what we call the economy.
All right, David on Twitter is going to get one more shot. David asks, does the capitalist state mean a paradigm of individual responsibility for your results? Indirectly, yes, because, again, okay, so for people who are new, capitalism is defined specifically as private property ownership. Private property means your ability to own a home, your ability to own land, your ability to own a private business, your ability to own an apartment that you rent out as a landlord, your intellectual property, your parental rights, and your individual liberties. That is the definition of private property. So when we're talking about individualism and meritocracy, the reason that socialists do not like individualism and meritocracy is that individualism and meritocracy uphold capitalism defined as private property ownership. You cannot have private property ownership without individualism and meritocracy. That's how you own the private property in the first place. So, indirectly, it does mean individual responsibility, but it's not. What I need you to understand is the specific definition of capitalism, and understand that individualism and meritocracy uphold that definition of capitalism, which is why they want to get rid of them. Does private property ownership mean individual? Yes. No. It means individuals. No private property ownership. You will not own a home. You will not own land. You will not own an apartment you rent out as a landlord. You will not own a private business. That's what that means. No private property ownership at all. Well, Trump is a fucking retard with horrible advisors because Kamala Harris isn't a communist. So anyone calling Kamala Harris a communist is, in my opinion, a retard that doesn't know what they're talking about and has probably never listened to the left at all.
Is both real and false. It's an appearance with real social consequences, but it's also a fetishistic appearance, something that appears natural rather than as something that is constituted through concrete activity by real people acting in history. So it's a necessary illusion. It's not just a sham or a fiction. What explains this necessary illusion? What's going on with it? And what are its consequences? And why is it that the capitalist state is a state that exercises...
Wait, seriously? The right's talking point now about the DNC was the protesters were paid to be there. Imagine my shock. Imagine my shock that conservatives, again, would not know what the fuck they're talking about, that they would spread lies and bullshit because they don't want to confront these issues directly. Imagine my shock. No, guys, the protesters were not paid to be there. And again, utilize these talking points as an indication of people you should listen to and people you should not listen to, because anyone pushing this line does not know what they're talking about.
Impersonal power over abstract citizens.
Hang on, I want to rewind this a little bit.
What explains this necessary illusion? What's going on with it? And what are its consequences? And why is it that the capitalist state is a state that exercises impersonal power over abstract citizens? Briefly, in my chapter, I argue that an appreciation of the state as a social form, something that gets socially constituted in history, this is something that allows us to see that it's not an instantiation of a timeless category, but instead it's the particular political form of a particular kind of society. It's the state of capitalist society. It's not the state in capitalist society. And it's not something that stands outside of capitalist production. It's not something that stands outside of capitalist social relations in general. And for this reason, I argue that the capitalist state can't be used to legislate our way out of capitalism. So before I unpack these claims and briefly walk through the steps of my argument, I do just want to say a couple things about the motivation behind the chapter. So the motivations for it rather substantially overlap with those of the volume as a whole. The co-editors and I, in the introduction, we describe how there's still a lot of currency to the idea that the capitalist state is just an instrumentality of class rule and nothing else, or that the capitalist state is merely a super...
Green-eyed lady, you've been around long enough to know better. First of all, when have we ever heard socialists talk about China? We've never heard them talk about China, or extremely rarely. Socialists talk about Russia. They talk about Lenin. They even occasionally talk about Stalin, mostly because they're complaining about him, but they do occasionally talk about Stalin. They talk about Marx. They don't talk about Mao. They don't talk about China. Extremely rarely. So if you're getting that talking point, I know exactly where you're getting it, and that is from shitty conservative influencers who don't know what they're talking about. In regard to Tim Walz, we've already covered this, and I'm pretty sure I've already covered this while you've been on this stream before. And you should know the answer to this because you've been to enough of my socialism streams where you should know the answer to this. No, Tim Walz is not a socialist. Okay, Marvin, you also... Okay, guys, just so we're very clear, I don't mind when new people ask questions. I don't mind when anyone asks questions. The problem is when people ask questions as a way to try to own the libs, or they ask questions that they should damn well know the answer to because they've asked them before. Oh my fucking God. It's going to be one of those nights, isn't it? It's going to be one... All right. Is it bad to own property? What you're trying to do is own the libs. Socialists believe it is bad to own property because owning property creates inequities in society in which some people have more access to resources than other people. They believe that all property should be owned by the collective. As a reminder, guys, I am not a socialist. I am teaching you what socialists believe. I am not stating my personal beliefs. So asking, is it bad to own property? You're making the assumption that that's coming from me. You're making that assumption. Like, I don't really know why you would make that assumption since I know you know better. We're explaining what they believe. So if the Marxists, socialists, and communists hate the Dems, first of all, they flat out say they hate the Democrats literally all the time. What's their stand about the world government and governance of the UN? The radical... Okay. Lord, help me have patience. Lord, help me have strength. Lord, help me have patience. Lord, help me have strength. The WEF globalists and the Malthusians are not the same thing as the radical revolutionary socialists in the United States. In asking this question, I can already see that you are conflating the socialists with the WEF Malthusians. I understand why you're conflating the two, because conservative influencers have lied about them being related, when in fact they are not related. The socialists are not the same as the globalists. They might ultimately have the same goal, but they're not on the same team. They openly talk about how they don't like them. They will just end up fighting with each other at some point. That's all it is. Why do they complain about Stalin? Because a lot of socialists believe that Lenin basically had it right, and that Stalin came in and ruined everything. So there is like on the radical revolutionary far left, there is it's basically like there are different factions that exist. They don't agree on everything. A lot of the socialists and the communists that we watch are they're Leninists, they're Bolsheviks. They essentially believe that everything would have been great had Stalin not come in and fucked everything up. Yeah, exactly. They consider Mao to be like Stalin. They don't like Mao either. Not related to the... Okay, David, I gave you the benefit of the doubt, bro. I unblocked you. I answered your last question, and then you follow it up with a question that has nothing to do with what we're watching right now. I'm not answering questions that have nothing to do with what we're watching. We are already at the city limits of Retardia, and we're not even 3 minutes into this presentation. So I'm working on a beginner guide. Actually, if you go over to my Substack, beginner guides don't just create themselves, and it's busy, and the DNC was this week. But if you want a beginner guide, what you do is go over to my Substack. See this re-education series? Go to the Woke 101 section. Go to the re-education introduction section. I'm creating an introduction guide of everything you need to know. There should be 7 articles in there. I need to update that. There are currently 7 articles in the re-education series. I'm baking out a lot of these things. This is the introduction. So I do have it, but people need to go and they need to find it and they need to learn. Also, another thing people can do is to go to the How to Speak Socialist section, go to this 4-hour on-demand class right at the top. Let me put that in the chat. David, this is important for you to watch if you actually care about learning this stuff and you aren't just trolling. Why do I call people retarded? Because they behave retarded. We are having an extra retarded day. I can already tell you that. Etta Peach over on Rumble says, while your teaching about socialist linguistics is so noted, I'm tired of hearing and reading about the word retarded and libtard. You're not going to police my language. I will call people retarded if they are behaving retarded. If you don't like that, you can go and listen to anyone else teaching socialism on the internet. Oh, wait, I'm the only one that's doing it. So I get to make the fucking rules. Yep, a lot of conservatives think the neo-libs are commies. Indeed they do. Indeed they do. May your prayers be answered. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it every week. All right, let's keep going. Actually, we can't keep going. I have to set up the sound again. We're never getting through this video. We're going to be here all night. You guys are going to see me drip into my own level of insanity tonight. I can already tell. It's going to be one of those nights. All right. Again, guys, I don't mind questions. I really don't. I know it seems like I mind questions. What we're getting tonight so far, we're descending kind of in the land of Retardia. And I just need everyone. Can we all just take a few deep breaths? Can we all just hinge back into reality? Because the more dumb questions that are asked, the longer we're all going to be here. And I will answer all the questions that are asked, but I also need for people to listen. I need people to pay attention. I need people to listen to the quizzes and stuff like that we do throughout the different Socialism Saturdays, not just this one, but in any other ones you encounter, because quite frankly, it is maddening having to say the same thing over and over and over again. So I need all of you to help me right now. We're already descending into the land of Retardia. We're less than 10 minutes into this. Good evening, trying to detour around retardia. I love the word retarded because it describes so much of our world. Happy Saturday, Queen. Hey, thank you, Christian. I appreciate that. Okay, everyone take a few deep breaths. We are detouring around the land of retardia now. We're not going in. We're refraining. All right.
For structural reflection of a productive base. And we suggest in the introduction, and it's my intuition as well, that this is an unsatisfactory way to approach the question, that it's not particularly illuminating. And so in addition to arguing against an instrumentalist view of what what the capitalist state does, I'm also positioning myself against another common way of thinking about the capitalist state, which I'll call the relative autonomy thesis. So there are many Marxists who, in attempting to move beyond the base superstructure metaphor, have posited the idea that the state or the political is relatively autonomous, not fully autonomous, but relatively.
I'm going to say this too. If I find out that any of these accounts that are coming in here and being disruptive are Marty Crabpipe, then Marty is not the person that's going to pay for that. Big tech is the person that's going to pay for that. And so if Marty wants to come in here and continue making new fucking accounts that I have to ban every 2 seconds and being disruptive and acting like an asshole, it's not you who's going to pay for that, bro. It's your hero. And he and I have finally come to what I think are okay terms. And he got a pretty big fucking compromise from me. And so if you want to continue to disrupt this just because you're being an asshole, just know you are not the one that's going to face consequences for that. He's the one that's going to face consequences for that. And it's going to be entirely your fucking fault. So cut the shit. Go somewhere else.
Autonomous from the economic, and vice versa. And again, it's my intuition that this is not a sufficient explanation for what's going on. At any rate, those are my motivations. I'm happy to talk more about these perspectives during the Q&A, but let me lay out the claims in my argument. So to us right now, the state appears as something that is separate from civil society. It appears as something that is at some degree of remove from the core activities of capitalist society. And these activities are the production and the exchange of commodities. I mean, in the ordinary course of things, the state does not conscript us into participating in the production process. Instead, we participate in production because we are compelled, not by anyone in particular, but by the form of our society. We're compelled to sell our labor power. If we don't sell our labor power, we don't have money. And if we don't have money, then we can't buy the things we need to live. And the things that we need to live are only available as commodities. So there are a couple of things to emphasize about this situation. The first is that this is historically unusual. This is not how social reproduction has occurred in most societies throughout history. And second,
pop quiz, what does social reproduction mean? What is the base definition of social reproduction? I'm not asking about the family. I don't want to see any relation to the family. What is the base definition of social reproduction? The base definition of social reproduction is that social systems will reproduce themselves until they are disrupted. The social system in this case is capitalism. What he just talked about was that our system is built on people needing to sell their labor to make money to live. We need to go and work a job in order to make money to buy the resources we need to live, okay? That's the basis of what capitalism is. The socialist left believes that this system is unfair, that it's oppressive, because people are exploited by the people they work for, because some people have access to more resources than others, because the bosses get all the benefits because they make all the money while the poor workers are oppressed and they just have all these hard conditions and they can never get ahead, and yada, 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 yada. That is why they want to overthrow capitalism, because they view it as a fundamentally unfair system in which resources are distributed unequally. They believe that capitalism will continue to reproduce itself until they do something severe to disrupt it. That is what they're trying to do. In order to achieve their goal of abolishing capitalism, they need to overthrow every system in our society. They do that by disrupting the production mechanism of capitalism, which is the nuclear family. The nuclear family is the primary way that capitalism is reproduced. This is why the left doesn't like the nuclear family. This is why the left wants to abolish the family. This is why the left is encouraging women to go into the workplace and not have kids, because kids, of course, create a nuclear family. If you keep women in the workplace and you keep them from having kids, then the nuclear family fundamentally gets disrupted. Ultimately, their goal is to overthrow the United States government, because they need to overthrow the United States government in order to get rid of the capitalist state. Let me know if you guys have any questions about any of that. I know I just threw a lot out there.
Not how social reproduction has occurred in most societies throughout history. And second, on its face, this doesn't seem like a state of affairs where the state is involved. It really does seem as though the state is something that stands apart from our daily lives, where we go about working in order to get money. And so the first step in my argument is really to dwell on the fact that this is so historically unprecedented. A political state exercising impersonal power on behalf of a notional general interest is something that's very historically specific. It's not something that we typically see, certainly that we don't see in the epoch prior to the consolidation of capitalist social relations beginning in the early modern period. We do see class states and class societies in eras prior to our own, but it's my claim that these are not the same sort of thing as the state that we encounter in capitalist society. In fact, it's my claim that they're not just particular instantiations of the state per se. Instead, those states, as well as our states, are historically specific social forms. They're socially constituted within history. They're not timeless. They don't exist outside of history. There's not some general thing called the state that is just baked into the deep structure of reality. Just like capitalist society has a peculiar form of wealth, it also has a peculiar and socially constituted and historically specific political form of appearance. So it's really only with the advent of capitalist social relations that we begin to see the exercise of public impersonal power for the sake of securing the conditions that are necessary for continued and expanding capital accumulation.
Okay, we need to break this down. So I said earlier that capitalism is not an economic model. Capitalism is a social model. It is a cultural model. Listen to how he's framing this.
General thing called the state that is just baked into the deep structure of reality. Just like capitalist society has a peculiar form of wealth.
Just like capitalist society has a peculiar form of wealth.
It also has a peculiar and socially constituted and historically specific political form of appearance.
It also has a like a specific political form, a social political form of appearance.
So it's really only with the advent of capitalist social relations that
it's only with the advent of capitalist social relations. That's what I wanted to get to. It's not an economic model. It is a social model about how we all relate to each other. I just want to pause right here. Does everyone understand that? Capitalism is not an economic model. It is, in the minds of the far left, it is not an economic model. It is how we all relate to each other. It is how we interact with each other. Well, yeah, the way they talk comes from academia. So a lot of them just live in academia their whole lives. This is academic talk. But it also prevents normal people from understanding what they mean. This is why we're taking the time to break it down. I literally just did explain. You need to listen. The advent of capitalist social relations. Again.
So it's really only with the advent of capitalist social relations that we begin to see the exercise of public impersonal power for the sake of securing the conditions.
The exercise of public impersonal power for the sake of
that are necessary for continued and expanding capital accumulation.
For the sake of maintaining the conditions that are necessary for capitalist accumulation. What that means is accumulating wealth, accumulating stuff. Capitalism is the social relations by which we maintain the conditions necessary to maintain an unequal society in which some people have more stuff than other people. Does everyone understand that? Yeah, well, we're basically living in Atlas Shrugged, Bill. It's making its way there. Let's listen again.
Form of appearance. So it's really only with the advent of capitalist social relations that we begin to see the exercise of public impersonal power for the sake of securing the conditions that are necessary for continued and expanding capital accumulation. And this is something that begins with historical episodes of primitive accumulation, like the ones that Marx discusses at the end of Volume 1 of Capital. These are violent episodes of the separation of the direct producers from the means of production and subsistence. But this separation persists. It didn't just happen once. It's something that gets reproduced indefinitely. And in my chapter, I talk about it being reproduced through what the late Simon Clarke called the anonymous rule of money and the law. And I think this is a really felicitous phrase, and I'm going to return to it a couple of times. So what is meant by...
Yes, this is correct. Excellent observation. Capitalism is a hierarchy. The socialist left wants to get rid of all hierarchies. Capitalism has a hierarchy to say, if you have more resources, if you have more money, if you have more property, if you have more stuff, you're on the top of the hierarchy. If you have less money, if you have less property, if you have less stuff, you're on the bottom of the hierarchy. The top of the hierarchy are the bourgeois, the owners, the oppressors. The bottom of the hierarchy, the owned, the proletariat, the oppressed. The goal of equity being Marxism, equity means sameness, is to level the hierarchy. It's to get rid of all private ownership so that everyone has access to all resources. And it's the same with any of the other things. If you're talking about gender equity is about men having access to all the money and all the power positions, women in the home doing the unpaid labor of raising the nuclear family. You abolish gender, which is what they want to do. You get gender equity. Anything that they're talking about in terms of like race or like whiteness and blackness, it's about leveling the hierarchy. You can pick any topic that they look at. It's the same thing. They despise hierarchy, even the hierarchy of parents being able to make rules for their children. Exactly.
The anonymous rule of money and the law. Well, the capitalist state reproduces the availability of commodity labor power by keeping the mass of direct producers separate from the means of production, by protecting property rights. And it upholds money as the universal equivalent that mediates exchange relations. Money is necessary for mediating exchange of commodities, and the exchange is how commodities...
Did you guys notice how we just snuck property rights in there? Just listen again. This is when I say capitalism means private property ownership, you're literally going to hear him say that.
The capitalist state reproduces the availability of commodity labor power by keeping the mass of direct producers separate from the means of production, by protecting property rights.
The capitalist state protects property rights. That's what they mean.
And it upholds money as the universal equivalent that mediates exchange relations. Money is necessary for...
Nope, hang on. Nope, no. Wokeness is not just on the left. Wokeness is on the right too. So I would not define wokeness as equity, because wokeness is just an authoritarian, oppressive ideology where people are struggle sessioned and canceled and peer pressured into doing what someone else wants them to do. So that's not how I would define wokeness. You are correct that equity means communism, but wokeness does not mean equity, because wokeness exists. Wokeness probably exists more on the right now than it does the left. Marvin, you need to stop doing this. This is what I mean by trying to debunk them. I'm asking you to stop doing this. This is the second time I've asked you to stop doing it. I'm not going to ask you a third time. Is it bad that some people have more than others? They think it is. They believe it is. So saying, why do you think that's bad? That's not going to solve the problem.
Mediating exchange of commodities. And the exchange is how commodities get socially validated as having been produced through abstract social labor. So the creation and regulation of money is a core aspect of what makes the capitalist state specifically capitalist. And it is in this respect that the capitalist state is in fact intimately bound up with value relations. And just as fundamentally, it's the public power, the public violence of the states, rather than the private violence of individual property owners, that does most of the job.
Hang on.
Of
the private violence of property owners. Hang on, I need to listen to this again.
Money is a core aspect of what makes the capitalist state specifically capitalist. And it is in this respect that the capitalist state is in fact intimately bound up with value relations. And just as fundamentally, it's the public power, the public violence of the states, rather than the private violence of individual property owners, that does most of the job of continuing to reproduce the separation of producers from production. And in this way, the state assumes a guise of being a neutral arbiter of legal disputes and of being a neutral enforcer of laws that supposedly have general applicability. So the state maintains a separation that began with historical episodes of primitive accumulation, but it's also...
Okay. Timmy, cut the fucking shit. I've already put you in a timeout once. I don't want to deal with this anymore. What you need to do, and what I've been telling you to do, is to stop talking and listen to what's being said. That's what needs to happen. Continuing to try to dunk on the libs, which is exactly what you're doing, is not going to help you learn. What's going to help you learn is to be quiet and to listen to what is being said. And then to ask questions specifically if you don't understand what's being said. What you're doing is saying, I don't understand why this is bad. That's not what we're doing here. I've explained this multiple times.
Also a separation that continues indefinitely. And it has to. In order for capitalists to be able to purchase labor power as a commodity, it has to be generally available on the market. And the condition of possibility for that is the existence of a huge number of people who are separated from the means of subsistence and production. So they can only reproduce themselves by acquiring commodities, and they can only acquire commodities by getting money, and they can only get money if they sell their labor power. And it's my contention.
All right. What you're trying to do here is own the libs, and I'm not going to do this anymore. You've been to enough of my streams to know better. I only want questions that are real. Guys, we are less than, I swear to fucking God, we are 15 minutes into this fucking presentation, and I'm already losing my fucking mind with the amount of bullshit that's going on in my chat tonight. Green-eyed lady, you've been around long enough to know better. I don't want to see any more of the dunking on the libs bullshit in the chat. The reason I have rules for what goes on in the chat when we're watching this stuff is that I am trying to listen to what is going on in the presentation and also interpret it for the chat and answer questions in the chat all at the same time. When I constantly have to deal with disruption and people not listening and following instructions, I can't do the other things. So the instructions are very clear. I do not mind if people ask questions. I do mind if people continue to try to debunk and own the libs because they can't fucking just stop and listen and to try to ascertain what the position is. If this keeps up, I'm just going to end the stream. I'm not going to do this. This is a 2-hour presentation. We are 15 minutes into it.
That the state is in fact implicated throughout all of this. It's not standing outside of it. So let me return again to Clark's phrase, the anonymous rule of money in the law. What does anonymous mean here? Well, this rule is anonymous because it's impersonal and it's abstract, but it's also anonymous in the sense that it's second nature. In other words, the activity of the state.
Hang on. Jigsaw Massacre over on Rumble says, so the capitalist social relations because people want to have their shiny new car because their neighbors have one. No, that's not what we're talking about at all. That's not what was in. And again, bro, you've been around long enough to know better. That was not in my definition of private property ownership at all.
Is fetishized as something that seems natural. It's not for nothing that we regularly hear appeals to the idea of the rule of law or of maintaining law and order. And these phrases are tossed around as though they are just natural constituents of our social world. And as far as state personnel are concerned, and as far as capitalist subjects are generally concerned, the state really is just going about its natural business of defending order and upholding the rule of law. And as lots of Marxist theorists have been arguing, at least as far back as Walter Benjamin, there's no contradiction in the use of violence, exceptional violence, if necessary, to maintain and construct that order. But the fetishism of the state doesn't end just with the state appearing to discharge these notionally timeless tasks. By doing these things, it also appears to be separate from society as such. So Ellen Wood aptly describes this as a real appearance. It's a real appearance in that it's a constitutive premise of capitalist society that the state appears to stand over and above it and separate from production. But this separation, as I've argued, is also a false appearance in that the state is the capitalist state, I should say, is the state form that is adequate to the reproduction of capitalist society. And so it is very much the in that the state is the capitalist state, I should say, is the
capitalist
state form that is adequate to the reproduction of capitalist society.
The capitalist state is the state form that is adequate to the reproduction of capitalist society. What does that mean? The capitalist state is the state form that is adequate to the reproduction of capitalist society. What does that mean? Do not, no. Well, it is social reproduction theory. But what does that mean? The capitalist state is the state form that is adequate to the reproduction of capitalist society. We've already established it's social reproduction theory, guys. I'm asking what that means. I'm not asking what it is. I'm asking what it means. This is why we listen. Well, complaining about it is not actually going to change the reality. So you're either answering or you're not. The capitalist state is the state form that is adequate to the reproduction of capitalist society. The government is the enforcer of capitalism. Beyond that, the United States government is the enforcer of capitalism. The government protects private property. That's what that means. Social reproduction theory is also an indirect correct answer because this is what he's talking about is social reproduction theory. But specifically, it's the government that is enforcing the reproduction of capitalism. Exactly. That means that America will remain capitalist until they disrupt what? America will remain capitalist until they disrupt what? The government is set up to reproduce itself and the form is capitalism? Yup. America will continue to be capitalist until they disrupt what? Until they disrupt the government. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. Not the family. He hasn't mentioned the family. The question was in relation to the government. Guys, the family is not the only thing that social reproduction theory applies to. This is why I ask you guys to listen to what I'm saying, not just repeat my talking points over and over and over and over and over again. He's talking about the government. He has not mentioned the family. The government is the thing that is reproducing the capitalist society. The capitalist state government is reproducing the capitalist society. Therefore, based on social reproduction theory, if you don't want the capitalist society to continue, you need to disrupt the government. This is why, guys, listening is so important. I need people to listen to what's being said. Because if you're just throwing out talking points, that means you aren't listening to what's being said. You are not applying the information. That is the whole point of doing this. Let's listen again.
And over and above it and separate from production. But this separation, as I've argued, is also a false appearance in that the state is the capitalist state, I should say, is the state form that is adequate to the reproduction of capitalist society. And so it is very much the state of capital. It's not anterior to capitalist social relations, and it's not something that's grafted onto them. So the separation of the political and the economic, if you want to call it that, is a necessary illusion. And
the separation of the political and the economic is a necessary illusion. They do not believe that these are separate issues. Therefore, anyone that's telling you that capitalism is just an economic model is lying to you. They do not believe that it is a separate issue.
And thanks to this necessary illusion, the state appears as a neutral arbiter of disputes, as a universal defender of the rights and privileges of capitalist subjects. So let me be clear, the capitalist state is not a class state in a way that's similar to how feudal lords enriched themselves when exercising direct power over their subjects. And it's not best understood as a state that is working directly and intentionally to...
Exactly. America will remain a capitalist state until the government is disrupted and overthrown. Exactly, Mitchell.
The good or the benefit of particular individuals or particular class fractions. Instead, the capitalist state stands in a relationship of mutual presupposition with capitalist production, even though it appears to have nothing to do with it. Without the capitalist state's maintenance of the separation of producers from production, without it ensuring that money is the universal equivalent of the necessary mediator of exchange, then investment in the production of commodities and the pursuit of surplus value simply would not be possible. And
hey, we got a $20 Rumble ran over on Rumble. I appreciate it, Etta, especially since I yelled at you earlier. So, you'll have to excuse me. Etta said, hasn't been to school in 40 years. It's hard to adjust. Listen, guys, I know that this method of teaching is not necessarily everyone's cup of tea. I really do get it. That's why I say if people don't like my tone, if they don't like my style, they are welcome to leave. You're welcome to go somewhere else. I'm the only person doing this on the internet, so good luck in finding someone else that'll teach you this stuff. But if you lean into it and you listen to what I'm saying and you refrain from having emotional outbursts in the chat where you insult me for no reason or you insult other people or you throw a massive fucking hissy fit, if you listen and do what I ask you to do, you will learn. You will learn more here than you will learn on any other channel on the internet. And if this isn't what you want, you can go somewhere else. But there's a reason that I'm harsh and severe with people who are disrupting this, because they're causing problems for everyone.
As a result, the social reproduction of capitalism would not be possible. So for the umpteenth time, the state appears to be separate from capitalist society. It is and it isn't. So what's the payoff of this view? Well, I argue in my chapter first that seen this way, the capitalist state cannot be seized and put to use in dismantling capitalist social relations, just because it presupposes and is a premise of capitalist social relations. It's not a generic instrument for enacting any particular kind of.
Hang on. How does the capitalist state maintain the separation of producers from production? Is that through property rights? Yes, exactly. Because the bosses ultimately own it. The bosses are ultimately the ones that benefit from it. This is what they think. It's not what I think. They believe that workers are oppressed under the system. The workers are the actual producers of like whatever the commodity is. They believe that they're oppressed. They don't benefit from their work. They don't profit from their work, things like that. The bosses are the ones that profit from their work. The bosses are the ones that make the decisions. They make decisions based on what they think is going to be most profitable, not what the people actually need. So they believe that if the workers were in control of things, that our entire system of production would essentially be completely different and not driven by the profit motive.
Policy, it's certainly not a generic instrument for just shaping social relations de novo. Instead, we should think of it in the terms that Marx used in the Grundrisse when he calls it the organized force of bourgeois society. And just for that reason, I also argue that we should not see the capitalist state as subordinated to capital. We should see it as the state of capital. And this isn't just pedantic wordsmithing. There are a lot of thinkers out there who do like to describe the capitalist state as subordinated to capital or as dominated by capital. And I think that the implication here is a claim that the state has somehow been denatured by capital, such that it's not functioning appropriately. It's not really acting as a state of all of its citizens. But as I've argued, we shouldn't think of the capitalist state as in any way being a state of its concrete citizens. It's the state of a notional general interest, one that can only be articulated specifically in terms of securing the conditions that are necessary for the valorization of capital. And the stakes here are theoretical, but they have downstream consequences for how we identify and understand and interpret and respond to real struggles. So in my chapter, I place a couple of quotes in opposition to each other. So on the one hand, I have a quote from the theorist William Clare Roberts, who describes the state as, quote, the armed and servile agent of capital, end quote. And then I contrast this with a quote from Werner Bonefeld, who says, quote, the state is not an agent of capital, end quote. There's a real opposition here, and it's a real point of disagreement. And I'd like to suggest that one is a better reading than the other. But this is something that we can talk about at length in the Q&A if necessary. So finally, I just want to say a few words about how the social form approach to thinking of the capitalist state as an historically specific social form, one that gets constituted through concrete activity of real social individuals, but then in turn mediates that activity. How does this stack up against other views? Well, let's return to the traditional interpretation of the base superstructure metaphor. I think that it's just not sufficient to assert, as Marx and Engels did in the Manifesto, that the modern state is nothing but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. It's a great line. But I would argue that it doesn't capture the specificity of the capitalist state, and it doesn't illuminate or really respond to the right questions. Again, this is something that I would be delighted to talk about at length during the Q&A. The other thing is the relative autonomy thesis. So this proceeds from a very common sense intuition, which is that we see a lot of variation in state policies across time and across political geography. And on the other hand, the policies enacted by the state are not infinitely variable. They do seem to be constrained to greater or lesser degrees. So according to the social form approach, this constraint on the content of the policies of the capitalist state, this constraint.
I mean, anything that is in support of capitalism is fundamentally against the people. So that's actually, I mean, it's an important point to understand. It might seem like something that's just like overly simplistic, but what the far left believes is that anything that protects the capitalist system, again, that means private property ownership, they believe that that is fundamentally against the people, the workers, the proletariat, just like normal people who are not the rich, not the wealthy, not the bourgeois, not the private property owners, things like that. So that will always be in opposition. So if the state exists to protect capitalism, the state is fundamentally against the people.
Is a result of the particular and peculiar form of the capitalist state as a capitalist state. And I think that this is a more parsimonious way of understanding what's going on than the relative autonomy thesis, which, as I understand it, requires us to posit multiple overlapping social realities. It requires us to posit that there's something called the political, and that there's something called the economic, and that they have distinctive logics. Whereas, to borrow another phrase from Werner Bonefeld, I think that there's really only one social reality. We live in a society that is dominated by value and the accumulation of capital, and it is from that starting point that we have to try to theorize the capitalist state. In other words, the question to ask is not whether the economic has primacy over the political or vice versa. The question to ask is, given that we live in a society that's dominated by the compulsion to participate in the valorization of capital, how do we make sense of the state's seeming appearance as something that's separate and over in society? How do we go about trying to figure out what the logic of that form is? So let me sum up so that I can turn things over to Alyssa so we can hear about her chapter. The capitalist state, as I've argued, is form determined such that it rules not in the service of particular class fractions, but it rules in the name of an abstract general interest. By doing so, and in the appearance, in the guise of being a separate and neutral entity that is separate from society, it enforces, there's that phrase again, Clark's anonymous rule of money and the law, and it does so over everyone. It inscribes the law of value as the ultimate law over all classes and communities in a social world whose single and overriding purpose is the continued and expanding accumulation of capital. Thanks very much.
Did everyone understand that last line he just said? How would you interpret that last line? It's really simple. We've talked about it several times already. This is a test to see who's been listening. How would you interpret that last thing he just said? In conclusion, nope, bot. Let's listen again. In conclusion, I'm going to ask you what he said in this.
Turn things over to Alyssa so we can hear about her chapter. The capitalist state, as I've argued, is form determined such that it rules not in the service of particular class fractions, but it rules in the name of an abstract general interest. By doing so, and in the appearance, in the guise of being a separate and neutral entity that is separate from society, it enforces, there's that phrase again, Clark's anonymous rule of money and the law, and it does so over everyone. It inscribes the law of value as the ultimate law over all classes and communities in a social world whose single and overriding purpose is the continued and expanding accumulation of capital.
What did he just say? State ruling to protect abstract general interest is private property. Exactly. Every single time they're talking about capitalism, that means private property ownership, your ability to own a home, your ability to own land, your ability to own an apartment rental, you rent out as a landlord, your ability to own a private business, your intellectual property, your parental rights, your individual liberties. That's what is the definition of private property. Capitalist state's purpose is to make itself rich at the expense of the people. Well, yeah, I mean, kind of. That's not exactly what he said, but yeah, I mean, that's the insinuation. Does anyone else have ideas on what he just said? The state creates a hierarchy that puts the accumulation of capitalism above any group of people. Yep, I would agree with that. Anyone else have any ideas about what he just said? The state protects and perpetuates the capitalist system, which supports inequity and hierarchical structures. Yep, I would agree with that, Dragon Balls. I would. Aha! So the U.S. Constitution and government has to be disrupted in order to thwart property rights. Yes. Ding, ding, ding. Correct. The goal of the far left is to overthrow the United States government and install a Marxist government that is more aligned with their interests. That means no more U.S. Constitution, no more White House, no more Senate, no more Supreme Court, no more Electoral College, no more Republic, probably no more state lines, to be honest, because they believe borders are an enforcement mechanism of private property. So we're going to get rid of all those borders. One country, completely open immigration, universal health care, universal public education, no private schools, no homeschooling, no private doctors, no private insurance companies. Energy is owned by the state, no private energy businesses, no private gas. So like the state decides what gas you can have, how much you can have. The state decides when you can travel. The state controls the food supply, no private food production. That's what we're talking about here, guys. That is what we're talking about.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
No
should I just take it away,
constitution.
Sean?
No constitution at all.
I was just going to jump in
No
real quick.
Oh, right. Sorry.
And ask Rob, like, what led you to, I would say, on the one hand, like, what kind of drove you to this kind of not just social form.
What leads them to their conclusions? They've been raised this way by the public schools. This is all taught in the public schools from the time kids are 5 years old. It's reinforced in the colleges. By the time they get through the colleges, the only other people they talk to are far leftists. The only books they read are far leftists. The social circles they're in are far leftists. It's from our entire society is built to reinforce this ideology from the time they're 5 years old. That doesn't count the people who are raised by socialist parents, because a lot of socialists are second and third generation socialists. They get it from birth. Sick people from all over socialist countries outside of the U.S. are booking Airbnb in Ohio to go to a capitalist U.S. Cleveland clinic for healthcare. They want to abolish free market capitalism. Yes, they do, Andre. Yes, they do. Thank you for that super chat. I do appreciate it, guys. We are halfway through our super chat goal. Thanks so much.
Analysis. I think I'm thinking even broader than this, right? So, like, how did you find yourself in this particular context where the state question?
See, eventually when we get through the first part of Socialism Saturday, which is always and universally a shit show. I don't know why this is. I'd really like to prevent the shit show that always happens at the very beginning of the stream. I just don't know how to do it. But once we get past the preliminary shit show where people are whining and crying and being disruptive and we descend into the land of retardia, then usually things are pretty smooth sailing for the whole rest of the stream. So if you've made it this far, congratulations. I think you've made it to the real show now. Now we can get down to business.
In and among, let's say, Marxist and politicized circles, kind of like got into your head and caused a little bug in there. I'm just assuming that because I read your writing. So,
thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, part of it is being a subject of this particular society that we live in. It's just hard not to immediately focus on parliamentary politics, and certainly that's how we're taught to think about the political, is that it consists of elections, and not just elections of any kind, not just aggregating the activity of lots of people, but formal and institutional patterns of really sort of channeling and limiting the scope of what's possible politically. And so I've always just been interested in how politics is reduced, how it's made to be non-identical with itself, to made to be less of itself in a society where it's presented to us as a given that on the one hand, we're told that we are the authors of our own political destinies because through concepts like popular sovereignty, which is really not a theory of how we can go about being authors of our own destinies. And on I guess I've just always been sort of struck by the contradiction between the high-flown rhetoric that particularly gets used in North Atlantic democracies about freedom and possibility, and the indeterminate character of political possibility. On the one hand, with the fact that on the other hand, nothing ever changes, and we seem to be given relatively few choices, or rather, we seem to be given choices with relatively few substantive differences. I guess that's sort of like a biographical answer. I think a more theoretical answer is I should confess that this is where I've arrived at the end of a journey where I think I've inhabited all of the positions that I described in my talk at various points. And I would be really interested during the Q&A to talk about them, to hear from people who are partisans of any one of these tendencies. I think that they all respond to or capture really important intuitions, and these are intuitions that people.
Hang on. Kiki, and I think Kiki, you're relatively new here. So Kiki is going through a mourning process right now and says, so what is our plan? Like, they are incredibly organized, and centrists and conservatives have no idea what's about to hit them. You're right. Centrists and conservatives have no idea what's about to hit them. It's just scary because it's clear that people know what is occurring, but the masses have no idea. What's our plan? Our plan is to learn. Our plan is to listen to as much as we can. Our plan is to break down the language. Our plan is to teach people who will listen. But the sad reality is, and you've already seen that somewhat here tonight, is that most people are not interested in listening. Most people are not interested in learning. Conservatives are not going to solve this problem. Conservatives are not interested in solving this problem. Conservatives are only interested in playing tribalist politics with the Democrats, pretending the Democrats are the real socialists when they're not. Socialist influencers are a joke. It's all about the grift and the money and the status and the fame and all that stuff. Not a single one of them actually cares about any of this. So where I've come through, and the mourning process is difficult. The mourning process is difficult. Is you have to understand that most people don't give a fuck. And the very best that we can do is to learn as much as we can to prepare ourselves for what's coming, because this will probably hit in our lifetimes. I think that they're going to try to overthrow the US government in the next 15 years. There's a lot of reasons for that. I've broken that down in other places. This will hit in our lifetimes. Many of you will have children who I really do believe will live in a socialist society. I really do believe that. Because so few people care to stop it. But if we can learn as much as we can, and this is why I'm so hard on people when I'm teaching this stuff, I don't want the biggest audience in the world. I want people who are willing to do what's required to learn. If we can learn as much as we can, and the people who are truly interested in learning can go out and teach other people, that's the very best that we can do. That is the plan. I've tried to get the conservative media to cover this stuff, guys. They won't. It goes against their entire narrative. So we cannot rely on the conservative right to save us. I think there is opportunity with like Nick Fuentes and the Groypers to remake the conservative right into something far more productive than it is now. But that's not up to us. That's up to them, right? So hang in there, I guess, is my best advice. Hang in there. Learn as much as you can. Teach as much as you can. Bill says in this context, is he trying to sound smarter than the other two? Nope, they're all speaking the same language. You're not speaking their language, Bill. You think he's trying to sound smarter because you don't speak their language yet. But he's not. He's just they're all speaking the same language. The very first thing that everyone should try to do is to learn how to speak their language. Learn how to speak socialist. Become fluent in their language. If this sounds like word salad to you, you're not yet fluent in their language. That's okay. We've all learned at some point. But you'll understand. Once you're fluent in their language, you will understand. Yep. Thank you, Spirit Matter. I am indeed right. I am indeed. Appreciate it.
Will have to form in the teeth of a society where, it's a cliche to say a society where critical thought is discouraged, but I think a society where it's just really difficult to think against the grain of that society. And so there's a really great conversation to be had, and I'd like to think that where I've ended up is where I'm going to stay. That what I've presented are my considered judgments, but I'm always willing to be persuaded otherwise. But I don't want to take up any more of Alyssa's time.
You're not taking up any of Alyssa's time, because Alyssa can talk for as long as she wants, and we will love to listen to that. So, excuse me. Thanks for a little journey down the personal road.
Define what capitalism means, according to the far left. This is a dissonant right-winger who's come into my chat to be disruptive. Define what capitalism means to the far left. Go. No one else answer this question, only him. You want to come in and be fucking disruptive because you want to talk about the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Define what the far left means when they say capitalism, motherfucker. Go. And by the way, if you don't do this, I will just ban you from my chat. So you have no choice. You will either play the game that you started by trying to be disruptive in the first place, or you'll just get banned. Define what the far left means by capitalism. Go. Bet you all the money in my bank account, Ian doesn't know what the far left means when they say capitalism. We know because we've heard them say it over and 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 over again. Ian's just here to talk about the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. No one's here. No one here is Jewish, bro. There's no Jews in this presentation. Tick-tock, Ian. What does the far left mean when they say capitalism? Tick-tock. tick tock, tick tock. You have two options, Ian. You're either, actually, you have three options. You can respond with the correct definition. You can admit that you don't know, or I will permanently ban you from my chat. Those are your three options, bro. There's no other option. Nope, wrong. Wrong. Completely wrong. Do you want to try again? This is not the correct answer. This is the dissident, right-wing, Jewish, obsessed answer. You got another try. Tick-tock, Ian. Tick-tock. You either respond with the correct definition, you say you don't know, or I will permanently ban you from my chat. Tick-tock. This is the dissident right-wing definition. This has nothing to do with what the far left says. This has nothing to do with what the far left does. My entire chat, who listens to these people all the time, they all know this. Ian only listens to dissident right-wingers who obsess about the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Ain't no one in this presentation Jewish. Tick-tock. You either reply with the correct definition, you admit that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, or you get permanently banned. Tick-tock. Ian. Tick-tock. Yep. I'm always right. Is Ian still here, or did Ian run away like a scared little boy? No, Ian's still here. Ian is listening right now. Ian is listening like the coward that he is. So we're going to give Ian just about 10 more seconds to do what I told him to do. You want to step into my classroom and be disruptive because you're obsessed with the Jews? We'll see how that goes for you. Nope. Wrong. Wrong. One more try, Ian. The words, I don't know, should probably be coming out of your mouth right now. It does not depend on the school of leftism. They define it the same way all the time. We know that because we listen to what they say all the fucking time. It is always and universally and perpetually defined in the same way. You don't understand what that is because you don't listen to the left. You listen to the dissident right. So, Ian, the words I don't know should be coming out of your mouth right now. Do you want to admit that you don't know, Ian? Do you want to admit you have no fucking clue what the left means when they say capitalism? Or do you want to get permanently banned? Those are your two options. Because we know you don't know the answer. We'll give you the... Ian, if you admit that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, we will give you the right answer. I will get everyone else in my chat to define the term capitalism. We've already been talking about it all day. You won't hear from me. You're going to hear from other people who know far more about this topic than you do. So, Ian, do you want to admit that you don't know, or do you want to double down and get blocked? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. I don't know what you're talking about. There's many ways to describe it. No, Ian, there's not. No. No, there's not. Try again, bro. Try again. The correct answer is, I don't know what the far left means by capitalism. Here, I'll give you a hint. Chat. Everyone in my chat, define what the far left means by capitalism for our retarded friend Ian here. Define what the far left means by capitalism. Well, then maybe you should be asking questions and listening rather than running your fucking mouth. When the left says capitalism, they mean private property ownership. Private property ownership. The left describes capitalism as private property ownership. 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 Private property. Private property. Ian, look at all those people who know. Look at all those people who know. Look at all those people who know the right answer, Ian. Well, no, Ian, you didn't know that. You didn't know that, because if you knew that, you would have said that. Now let's try again, Ian. Let's have another pop quiz. You know everything. You know what the left means by private property ownership. Tell us, how does the left define private property ownership? Go ahead, Ian. You want to not give in on this yet? You want to still dig in your heels and pretend you're a big man and pretend you know what the fuck you're talking about? How does the left define private property ownership? Go. Look at all the people in my chat who are smarter than Ian. Look at all the people in my chat who were smarter than Ian. Nope, there's not much more to it, Ian. You're making that shit up. Everyone in my chat has the same answer because we've listened to them say it time and time again. Look at all the people who are smarter than you, bro. Look at all those people who are smarter than you. We keep answering this over and over and over again. Ian really should just take the L and shut up and listen. We are making an example of him. Yup. Yup. Ian, what does the left mean when they say private property ownership? Go. You know everything, bro. You know everything, right? What does the left mean when they say private property ownership? Go. No, it doesn't depend. It doesn't depend at all. Wrong. Incorrect. This is your last fucking chance. What does the left mean by private property ownership? You either answer clearly or you are getting permanently banned. The chat's telling you you're wrong, bro. Wrong. Do you get off on this, Ian? Is that what we're doing right now? Nope. Wrong. Wrong, Ian. Wrong. Ian, you're gonna admit you don't know yet? You said you were new. Are you going to stay here and learn, or are you gonna keep acting like you fucking know everything? All you need to say is you don't know, Ian. That's it. The pain will stop. The example will stop as soon as you admit that you don't fucking know. What else? Owning a home. Yup. Owning a home is one of the things they consider to be private property ownership. What else? Nope. No. What else? Do not fucking argue with me. Either answer the question or get the fuck out. What else is on the definition of private property ownership, Ian? I'll sit here all night. I will make an example of you all fucking night. What is the definition? You literally have people giving it to you in the chat right now. You literally have the people answering this for you. Why is it that my entire chat knows this, Ian, and you don't? Oh, because they sat here and learned and you haven't? Because you came in here thinking you know everything when in fact you know nothing? All right. Ian doesn't know. Ian is now getting permanently banned. Goodbye, Ian. If he had just said he didn't know, or he had tried to come up with a definition, he wouldn't have gotten permanently banned. But since he wants to play that game, he can just go somewhere else. Goodbye, Ian. You won't be missed.
I think need to hear a little bit more from that in people in these circles. We tend to hear a lot of withdrawn political demands, and so plugging ourselves back into the world is exceptional and useful, and as it turns out, quite pleasant. So thanks for Rob, really appreciate that. Alyssa, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, so thank you so much, Sean and Mahim, and the rest of the Red May crew for organizing this and for, both this event and then the broader series on the volume. It really is gratifying, Sean, to hear that it's been, of interest to, not only to you, but to your coworkers, to people you've been talking to. I think these questions are really essential to our moment. It's really, it's exciting to see like a growing interest in state theory, and, thanks especially, to our fabulous editors, Rob and Raphael and Ava, for, like mobilizing this project and sort of doing all of the legwork to bring it together, because I have certainly learned a lot from it. So I'll just talk a bit about my chapter, and then looking forward to talking with Rob, to talking with everyone out there watching. Thanks for being there. But so my chapter is called State, Nature, Capital: State Theory for the Capitalocene, and it basically addresses some of the overarching theories of the state that Rob was just describing, but it sort of tries to think them through in relation to climate change and climate politics, and kind of more broadly ecological politics in particular. And the state, I think, has been actually sort of surprisingly absent from a lot of recent work on nature and capitalism. There's been a lot of great eco-Marxist work in recent years, but the state is kind of like around the edges at best of a lot of that work. And so it seems to me like an area that we really need to, sort of think through, sort of what role this sort of this, if not an agent of capital, but a different kind of agency is playing. So this chapter in particular emerges from, it's sort of both, I think, trying to identify and think through what I think is a bit of an aporia in some of the existing literature, but it really emerges more directly from my thinking about more immediate debates about contemporary climate politics and sort of what the role of the state in those are. And so, for decades, we were in this position where market mechanisms like carbon taxes and cap and trade and things like that were kind of the dominant, and in many ways, really the only option on the table for, reducing carbon emissions, for climate policy. As I'm sure everyone is familiar, those approaches have been challenged in recent years by sort of, proposals that foreground more direct state intervention or action. Intervention might be overly strong, but in service of developing, mostly in terms of developing green technology. But we had, certainly calls for the Green New Deal, which I worked on, and I'm happy to talk about more. But also, obviously, a lot of attention to and both calls for and some instantiations of green industrial policy. I'm not sure that the IRA here in the US even rises to the level of green industrial policy, but be that as it may, something where you have a kind of more active state role in subsidizing green tech and green capital and so on. So those kinds of proposals and debates, and the shift away from like the markets only model of climate policy also sparked what I think was a very interesting and important round of debates around what we can expect from the state, like whether we can expect the capitalist state to act in ways that challenge the interests of fossil capital, whether a more substantial break with capitalism is necessary to address climate change, and like
whether a more substantial break with capitalism is necessary to address climate change. As a reminder, guys, the left believes that capitalism is responsible for all of our problems, up to it including climate change. They believe climate change is entirely caused by the prioritization of the profit motive above any sort of environmental considerations.
What the role of the state in that might be. I think a number of people have argued that a serious break with capitalism is necessary to avert ecological disaster, and we can't expect the capital state to deliver on decarbonization promises. More broadly, ecological thinkers have
Yeah, no, remember, the Green New Deal is not a socialist policy. The Green New Deal is a progressive policy. Progressives and socialists are not the same thing. I don't think they mind it as like, well, I shouldn't say that. Socialists don't like the Green New Deal because the Green New Deal doesn't go far enough. They're not gonna they don't actively campaign against it or anything, but they're just like, this is like a fucking waste of time. Like, what are they even doing? Why are we even playing this game? Blah, 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 blah. It's like,
including non-Marxists, but ecological thinkers have long been critics of the state in their own right. They say ecological phenomena and political boundaries don't align. There are all of these things that states are sort of not suited to doing when it comes to acting with what people talk about as like ecological rationality or ecological reason. And so we have many critiques.
Bro, they don't. And I feel like I explained that to you several times this week, and it just really seems like you're not listening. The Democrats don't pander to them. They hate the Democrats because they don't pander to them. What do you mean? Why do they deliberately equate the two? So, I mean, who are you talking about?
Of the state, from both Marxist ecological perspectives and eco-Marxist perspectives. At the same time, the temporal urgency of the climate crisis has presented this set of political challenges. We have obviously a very short.
Green New Deal doesn't pander to socialism. The socialists don't like the Green New Deal. All right, it's all good.
Timeline, many of the things that seem required to cut carbon emissions are things that only states other than capital seems capable of funding and executing at scale, whether that's regulation of carbon emissions or building out infrastructures of renewable energy or providing low carbon public goods like dense housing, public transportation, and so on. So we've had these sort of debates, like often more focused on the specifics of climate policy. And then my chapter tries to kind of like step back from those a bit and address some of the debates about the role of the state.
The Green New Deal is not socialist policy. The Green New Deal is progressive and Democrat policy. Progressives and Democrats are not socialists. Progressives and Democrats don't go far enough for socialists. They don't really care about the Green New Deal much at all, because it's not doing what they want. Socialists believe the only solution to environmental change is to abolish capitalism, guys. That's it. They do not believe that it is possible to solve the climate change crisis without abolishing capitalism. The Green New Deal does not abolish capitalism. No, they're not. The Democrats are not captured by the far left on the schools. The far left just controls the schools. That's not about the Democrats being captured by the far left. The far left just controls the schools.
In climate action, a little bit higher level of abstraction to appraise the conditions under which we might expect states to act in order to prevent capitalism's ecological crises or not. And so it basically does this by thinking through.
Why would they? Why would the Democrats push back on them? Why would they? They have no incentive to push back on them. The Democrats didn't talk about education policy any more than the Republicans talked about education policy. There's no incentive. No one cares. Literally no one fucking cares. If people cared, they would have talked a lot more about education policy at the DNC. They would have talked a lot more about education policy at the RNC. There is no incentive to save the public schools because people don't give a fuck.
Through two debates in Marxist thought and putting them together. So the first is a debate about capitalism and nature amongst eco-Marxists. The second is a debate about the state amongst Marxist state theorists. And I try to kind of, again, put these.
Like Human Centipede, is your argument really that the Republicans push back on the public schools? Is that the argument that's being made? Well, the Democrats don't push back on them, so they it's like, neither do the Republicans. Trump hasn't done shit to push back on the public schools. And I don't believe Trump is going to defund the Department of Education. I don't believe he's going to do that at all. I'd love to be wrong, by the way, but I just don't think he should. I don't think he will.
These debates, which I think have largely developed separately into conversation to clarify assumptions about the relationship between state, capital, and nature.
Listen, I have tried I have tried to get people to care about what's going on in the public schools. I tried harder than most people to get people to care about what's going on in the public schools. Well, I mean, that's indoctrination just as much as anything on the left. I don't want PragerU in public schools either. People don't care.
That I think are often kind of implicit in arguments, but not stated as directly as they might be, and that I hope might be clarifying in some respect. I'll say just like off the bat, this is like an intentionally stylized and schematic in places approach to these debates. It's inevitably simplifying them, so I apologize for kind of like boiling down.
Well, that's nice, Sassy, but school choice isn't going to fix shit. School choice is not going to solve the problem. There is no chance that school choice is going to fix the public schools. Zero chance. So it's kind of just a giant-ass waste of time and political pandering.
Down very complex debates and just some like pretty basic points, but I think it's like to try to clarify some of these sort of like key ideas that are I think at work in a lot of our arguments. So I'll just sort of go through the two debates that I look at, and then and how I put them together.
So I'll
start off with this first
strategy,
question,
guys.
which I think is one of the central questions of eco-Marxism, and this is at a very basic level, what is the relationship between capitalism and nature? There are a lot of different ways to approach that, of course, but the question that I focus on in the chapter is one that I think is particularly significant for this purpose, and that's whether the question of whether capitalism's tendency to destroy what we might think of as ecological nature also constitutes a crisis.
Capitalism's tendency to destroy what we might think of as ecological nature.
This for capitalism itself. So, on the one hand, we have arguments that capitalism's destruction of nature is also self-destructive, that it reverberates back into profitability and affects processes of capital accumulation. And this is sort of most significantly associated with James O'Connor's second contradiction thesis, which draws on both Marx and Karl Polanyi to theorize what he calls the second contradiction of capitalism. He says that you can get that you can have crises of capitalism not only by virtue of the overproduction of commodities, but the underproduction of the conditions of production, like ecosystems. If you underproduce ecosystems, that might lead to higher ecological costs and might reverberate back into to production itself. And that this creates a crisis that has to be resolved in some way, if it's not to sort of, to be a sustained crisis for capital. There have been similar arguments made really prominently in recent years. I think this has been a very influential thesis, and it's been, taken up by people like Nancy Fraser and Jason Moore, who have argued in recent years that capitalism's facing an epochal, potentially terminal crisis that's sort of stemming from this tendency towards ecological destruction. So that's one position. On the other, we have this a position that, yes, ecological crises are, capitalism does sort of cause these ecological crises. They're often devastating for forms of human and non-human life, but they tend not to have direct or major consequences for capital accumulation. So people like John Bellamy Foster and Paul Burkett say, there's no feedback mechanism between ecological degradation, ecological crisis, and then economic crisis. It doesn't necessarily, you might be destroying the planet, but it may not sort of feed back into processes of capital accumulation sort of at least as immediately enough that capital has to respond. Obviously, like even capital needs a minimally habitable planet, but capital accumulation might be able to sort of continue with very high levels of degradation, ecological degradation, with what we might think of as social and ecological crises that are crises for people, for communities, for more than human worlds, but not for capital itself. And so that would mean sort of we can't rely on this sort of idea that there's inherent instability in the system, but you have to make a kind of case against capitalism on the basis of these harms to the harms it's causing in themselves. So that's one debate. Then, part two of the paper looks at this other debate, the Marxist state theory debates about sort of the relationship between capital and state. And, here too, I think, certainly Marxist state theorists tend to share many broad positions. So, pretty much everyone will critique bourgeois theories of the state. So, we can't think of the state as just like a fully autonomous institution with its own logic and ends. It's not just an expression of the popular will. It's not just a neutral terrain where interests are contesting. Instead, we have to think about the modern state as, in some way, specific to capitalist society, although as Rob has suggested that like the ways that people think about that differ, structured by class relations, oriented towards stabilizing accumulation, states, people will say, do things that capital can't, secures private property, it mediates between capitals and so on. And so, there are, again, a lot of things we could talk about here, as with the capital nature debates, but the sort of question that I focus this,
Guys, I'm just letting her get through her spiel because the Q&A part is going to be more interesting anyway. So that's why I'm not really saying much. I'm letting her get through it. If there's something I have to say, I'll say it.
Dichotomy around is basically the degree of political agency that exists in the view of the capitalist state, and the degree to which people think it might be possible to use the state against capital. Whether that means sort of against capitalism is maybe another question, or we can get into that too. But in any case, so here I basically draw here on Raju Das's distinction between structural and class struggle analyses, and this is also a stylized distinction, but I think it's useful for the question I'm asking around sort of like what degree of political room is there. And so on the one hand, what Das describes as structuralist accounts are ones that see the state as strongly constrained by its role in capitalist society. So, the state here is constituted by class society, by capital accumulation, such that it will not, and in some cases simply cannot, act in ways that are counterposed to the general interests of capital or oriented towards non-capitalist ends. And this view is, I think, most forcefully expressed in the state derivationist and related social form traditions of Marxist thought, including many of those which Rob has just really usefully outlined for us, wherein, basically the economic and political are these sort of constitute a separation and unity, to quote Marx, discrete elements of capital society, but that are sort of developing out of the same underlying social relations. But there are other approaches that, although they have sort of theoretical differences, also kind of suggest a similar level of state constraint. So I think some of Nick Polantz's earlier and more sort of structuralist texts do have this quality of sort of basically viewing even the autonomy of the state as being functional for capital in some way, and that whether or not the state, maybe the state can't succeed in all of its aims, but the state can't really be intentionally turned against capital or made to serve non-capitalist ends. So important, I think, theoretical differences between these positions, but in terms of what we can expect from the state, there is at least some, I think, accordance. On the other hand, sort of what Das calls class struggle approaches, again, they share a lot of key elements with a more structuralist account in terms of seeing, there are certainly constraints on the state. The state carries out various functions for capital and so on. But there is also sort of a degree to which the structure of the state is also affected and informed by the struggle between classes in historically contingent moments. So the state in general, or elements of it, might act in ways that don't serve either the interests of particular fractions of capital or capital in general. And so there might be sort of, policies like full employment policy that bolster workers' position against capital, that sort of advance a class struggle, whether or not they sort of are capable of, sort of fully defeating capital through the state is I think often, people have different positions on this, but there's sort of some room to move. I think I want to say these positions don't necessarily say that any time that the state acts to advance, working class interests or proletarian interests, or other non-capitalist interests, are necessarily a blow to capitalism's viability, but there's at least this possibility that the state will act in ways that aren't directly oriented towards reproducing capital in, the short or long term. And Polantz's kind of condensation view of the state as a condensation of class struggle in his later work, some work by people like Bob Jessup. So.
Are you a socialist? Bro, define capitalism for me in the chat, please. Define what she means when she says capitalism.
Certain uptakes of Roth film band. So these are sort of like the positions. And then in part 3, I put these debates in conversation to explore the interaction between the sort of the 3 central terms, state, capital, and nature.
Doesn't matter.
And here too, I think James O'Connor offers a really useful starting point. So O'Connor, in the second contradiction essay, he says the state mediates capital and nature.
That's because you don't know their language.
That, the conditions of capitalist production are politicized. He says every state.
Again, guys, if this is your opinion, and I don't mean this as an insult, if you believe that she's not saying anything, that's because you don't speak their language. You need to be here more. You need to listen to more socialism. You need to do my How to Speak Socialist class. That will teach you the language. But if you think she's not saying anything, it's because you don't speak their language yet. You're not fluent yet.
State agency and political party agenda may be regarded as a kind of interface between capital and nature. And I don't think you have to adopt the whole his entire theory of the contradiction, or even the claim that every state agency is an interface between capital and nature, to sort of appreciate what I think is an important point of the way that the state has a mediating function in the relationship between capital and nature. And so I kind of take up this basic idea to say our view of how the state does that is going to vary depending on one's view of A, capital's relation to nature, and B, capital's relation to the state. So based on all of this, this is sort of where this gets us is to this little, I dropped this little 2x2 chart. Mahim, if you can pop that up there. Yeah, so I basically make this little 2x2 chart that tries to combine each of the 2 positions and say okay, here's what we'd expect if we take, if we kind of combine this XY view of capital and nature and this view of state and capital. So if we look, for example, if we see that capitalism, we think that capitalism is not self-destructive, and that is that first sort of, the left-hand column is the sort of Burkett-Foster position that capital's destruction of nature is not self-destructive. If you merge that with a more structuralist view of the state per Dawson, we wouldn't expect state action to prevent ecological destruction, because in this case we would see state action to prevent ecological and social crises as basically a limitation on capital's destructive tendencies that's not undertaken in the interests of capital, but rather that's being undertaken in the interests of human and non-human life, and that would seem implausible to us based on our understanding of the state. If we by contrast see the sort of capital is socially and ecologically destructive, but not self-destructive. But we have the sort of class struggle view of the state, and that sort of kind of top left position. Then we would say, well, states generally are going to act in capital's interests, but there might be some room to sort of, we might expect that there might be places where the state might act, to protect people from climate disasters, even if they're not also sort of, workers for a particular industry, or preserve unprofitable forms of non-human life, and potentially even to do so in ways that not only don't directly serve capital, but that might even, in instances, cut against capital's interests. And then we can kind of have a sort of similar configuration on the right-hand side, where if you see, if you think capital is self-destructive and that the state does act for in the interests of capital, you would expect states to take action to ward off, climate and other ecological disasters, but only in ways that are sort of serving, preserving capital accumulation, or at least that are doing that first and foremost, and that, maybe there are downstream effects for, for protecting, human life or certain ecosystems, but those will be sort of subsidiary to, or those will be downstream from the broader goal of preserving sort of the conditions that capital needs, and so on. So, that's basically the idea of kind of trying to break these down, and here are the kind of 4 positions that we might expect based on roughly based on what view you have of the state and what view you have of capitalization in nature. Schematic and stylized, but I hope at least sort of a rough start for thinking through what are the kinds of possibilities we might expect, again with this more abstract level. So there is, I think, interestingly, basically only one there's really sort of like one position where we would see capital as like absolutely, because as a capital state, not only will not, but basically like just like is not going to do anything to stay off ecological catastrophes because they don't immediately threaten capital itself. But there's also kind of only one configuration in which state action to address ecological crises constitutes like a genuine challenge to capitalism, which could lay the groundwork for a more substantial eco-socialist program. Doesn't mean they're equally likely. This isn't like, oh, there are 4 positions, so they're each like a 25% chance. But, you know, I think just to sort of say that this is, I think, those one, I think, significant upshot. And more generally, you know, the chapter, and I'm almost done here, but the chapter doesn't like, argue for anyone in particular. It's just trying to lay out what I think sort of these important assumptions, ideas, you know, kind of more like, yeah, these basically like where we might position sort of different sort of like immediate kind of the questions that Rob described as being ones of like kind of immediate parliamentary politics or like kind of day-to-day like policy stuff, and where those how we might situate those in relation to sort of broader currents of Marxist thinking. The last thing I'll say is just that you know, I don't make an argument for any of these, but I will say that I don't think that, you know, in my own view, the fact that certain political projects aren't necessarily like a break with capitalism isn't necessarily an argument against them, you know, given the exceptionally short time horizon of impending climate catastrophe, the non-linear nature of the climate system, you know, various sort of temporal disjunctures that attend most obviously the climate crisis, but also other ecological crises. You know, I tend to think that buying time for anti-capitalist politics, even in ways that sort of are like in some way tenable within the system, are essential. But you know, assessments of even the prospects for buying time will, I think, depend to some degree on like where one positions themselves within this chart. So I will leave it there for now. I've already gone on, I think, over my time, but looking forward to discussing this with everyone here and to questions and everything. So thanks a lot.
Thank God.
Thanks for that, Alyssa. Also, shout out to the 2x2 square, firmly in a pro 2x2 square camp.
Love it.
Yes. I would also appeal to, for example, another contributor to the book, Mike McCarthy's class paper that also spawned a great debate over 2x2 squares. So, you know, everyone watching, look deep within your heart and soul and really figure out where your position is on this very important schematic debate or debate over schematics. Yes, exactly. Alyssa, I'm just curious, you know, we have, when we had you out in Seattle to talk about the Green New Deal, we've had you on Red May before. And I'm a frequent reader of your work. You're one of my favorite political theorists today. So I'm curious over something, though, that I guess I haven't seen, but like kind of what drove you in your own life into this intersection towards nature and or ecosystems and capital. How did we get there for you?
Great question. Yeah. In a lot of ways, I mean, basically through like Hurricane Katrina, which is now like a long time ago. But I spent a bunch of time in New Orleans after Katrina when I was, you know, a teenager, and was very like, that was a real, you know, what the fuck moment of just like seeing like total, you know, total state collapse and abandonment, and trying to figure out like what happened there. I think has been, you know, how to understand this, like how to understand more broadly, like that kind of led me down a path of like realizing I needed to think about climate change. I needed to think about like the what the underlying causes and forces at work and creating this disaster. I was working on disaster for a lot at the beginning, and then I increasingly kind of got into sorry, I keep like leaning out of the screen. And then I increasingly got just like realized I had to like understand capitalism and Marx, and like that just kind of like set off a whole rabbit hole, which is a wonderful journey. But then, so in some ways, I think actually it's been interesting. I was thinking about this as I was working on like this chapter, and as I'm trying to like, I think my next book project is going to be more on like capital, climate, and state. But it feels in some ways like returning to the original questions, which were very much about like, where is the state in relation to, into the sort of destructive consequences of like capital driven like climate disasters and other ecological disasters, but like I sort of have spent most of like the book that I just am finishing now is mostly a kind of like capitalism and nature book rather than sort of state per se, but yeah, so that's sort of the very original point now, like almost 20 years ago, and I'm like, wow, that was a long time ago. Like my students are like, Hurricane Katrina? So they barely know what it was. Anyway.
I was also down there after Katrina in New Orleans and some of the surrounding parishes doing reconstruction work. At the time, I guess would be, or currently it'd be framed as kinds of, directed mutual aid work or whatever. Yeah. But
did you do stuff with?
What did I say earlier about what these people believe in terms of capitalism causing all problems? You're trying to be funny right now, but now we're going to check to see if you're listening. What did I say, 20 minutes ago? About what these people believe the origin of climate change is. We're waiting for your answer, Connor. What did I say about 20 minutes ago about what these people believe about what the origin of climate change is? All right, you left and came back. That's fine. You're allowed to leave. These people believe that capitalism created all problems, including climate change. If you get rid of capitalism, that's going to enable you to solve all problems. She actually would spend about half of her talk, which I know she was talking very fast, but she spent half her talk saying, I don't think we can solve this without getting rid of capitalism.
The common ground?
Yeah.
All right, absolutely. Common ground. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, we probably were like in the same place at some point. Yeah.
If that was the case, then you'd find this sort of like hideous loaf creature in the corner.
Exactly.
That would be me. That was definitely me. Or like on a roof or falling off a roof somewhere. So
yeah.
But very interesting and fascinating.
Is she the person who wrote that queer nuclear paper that James was tweeting about? And James wrote this whole like long ass Twitter thread that didn't really say anything when all James really should have said was like, queering nuclear weapons means disarmament.
And also really excited to hear about free gift coming down the lifeline right now. I'm really looking forward to that.
Thanks.
So for everybody watching, please, start sending in some questions, some considerations,
Q&A,
whatever you got. We'll take confessions. We'll take them all. Before we get to that, though, I'd be really interested in having Rob and Alyssa have a little discussion on the one hand about their presentations today, but also having worked on this project together for a while and been talking about it for almost a year now. If there's any sort of interesting either developments or curiosities or engagements that you have on your contributions.
Yeah, definitely. I'll bite. So Something that was great about preparing for this presentation was getting to read Alyssa's chapter again. And
there's a previous Socialism Saturday about this. Look for the Socialism Saturday spy stream, where we went inside of a socialist environmental justice conference. They explain this part.
Got me thinking about word choice. So the title has the word Capitalocene. I don't know where to place the accent, but capital is there rather than Anthropocene, which is often the more commonly used locution. And there have been a lot of debates about whether it's more appropriate to describe climate change arising as a result of social domination of nature as whether it's more important to just establish that it's human cause, or it's more important to say that, well, it's a specific form of human activity, which is capitalist production, and the concomitants of those particular processes. And it got me thinking, though. I don't necessarily want to add more dimensions to the chart. I'm pro chart, but I did start to wonder about, is there another, and I'm going to mix my metaphors here. Like, is there another axis, another polarity in play here, which is so on the one hand, like we want to position these accounts with respect to each other in terms of how they understand the capital nature relation, but also how they understand the capital state relation. Do you think that it would be fruitful also to try and arrange them in terms of how they understand specifically what it means for human-caused climate change, human-caused destruction of ecosystems to be happening in the way that they're happening? So not just sort of like theorizing nature as, is it separate or not from human beings, and if so, how? But also sort of like, is there a payoff for thinking about the specific mechanisms whereby?
All right, so you're a socialist. Got it. Okay, socialist.
Human activity on the planet right now, as opposed to 10,000 years ago, is pushing us to the precipice. And I'm thinking here specifically about the inadequacy of really sort of like meme level arguments, like, oh, we know the names and addresses of people who are destroying the planet. It's like we can set that to one side, but there does seem to be disagreement about how we should think about the specific mechanisms by which we as capitalist subjects are destroying nature.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's disagreement. I think within the people I had in mind for this chapter, like, I don't know, just seeing like the major currents of eco-Marxist thought, like the kind of Bellamy Foster school, like, Socialist work, which hadn't really kind of come out as much when I started, or at least been translated as much when I started working on this. I guess his first book, Karl Marx's Eco-Socialism, was out. But anyway, now he's gotten 3. Mom, more the kind of like new wave of stuff, Nancy Fraser's more recent stuff, and so on. I think most of those people would agree that, like, it's definitely capitalism. It's like, it's not human action in general, it's capitalism. I do think that sometimes there's some aspects of differences in the mechanisms per se. And like, I think that, if you want to get more fine-grained in terms of thinking about how and where, what kinds of interventions you might need to make to challenge that, or what sort of specifically, for example, if you had some view that you could use the state to challenge aspects of this, like where would you push? Basically, you would need like a more specific account of mechanisms. But I think that at least within the sort of group of eco-Marxist thinkers, like I have read very few people who are saying, who like, it seems like there's basic agreement that capitalism is to blame, and it's not just like some individual guys like not like call up like Rex Tillerson or whoever and you like protest outside his house. I mean, you might want to do that, but it's like not because you think that he is the driving force of things. And so you know, and I think that there are people who are kind of in the broader you know, eco-socialist, eco-left kind of world who probably have more of that position. And I think that people like Naomi Klein who kind of go back and, you know, will sometimes say it's like a more structural kind of like capital, you know, capitalism is like the problem, and sometimes we'll kind of have a more like, you know, kind of directed at particular people. And, you know, some of that I think is also rhetorical and political strategy. You're like, all right, like, yes, it's very helpful to have names and addresses and to like pinpoint specific people and to point the finger and all of that. But, you know, you don't want to do it to the point where you're losing track of sort of the you know, the systems that they're operating within. And, you know, the reasons why you just put some other, you know, Rex in place of Tillerson, it's going to be the same. So, you know, I think that there is kind of probably a broader apparatus of like eco-socialists and eco-left and like progressive positions that are kind of around this that, you know, I think by having some, you know, maybe some offshoots from the chart might help flesh out a bit. And then I certainly think that like there's a ton of questions around like what you think the key thing to press on. Like, I think the question, like the chapter doesn't talk that much about even like kind of splits within capital, like, you know, green fossil capital, right? Like, you know, can you have a state that's acting as I think a lot of green industrial policy is doing now, or at least trying to do, often kind of unsuccessfully actually, but to like promote sort of the development of green capital as like, you know, to compete against maybe, you know, fossil capital. There's like no disciplining of fossil capital, but it's like a, you know, the attempt to create some kind of new challenger, or at least like a new source of jobs and revenue, which may not ultimately challenge it that much. So in any case, there's I think a lot of other questions that are kind of like more specific, definitely. And so, you know, let the 2x2s flourish.
I appreciate that you're asking questions, but I've already referred you to previous articles and videos that I've done explaining that specifically. You can find them on my YouTube channel. You can find them on my Substack. If I stopped every presentation to go over this every single time, I would literally be repeating this every single day. So what I would recommend is make a note to go look at it later, but I'm not going to walk you through the whole thing right now.
Like they do like a 6x, I don't know, 2x2 was already for me as like a political theorist rather than a sociologist or like a, you know, a more social scientist. I was like, wow, this is getting, you know, new territory. But next time, more angles maybe.
Angles, not angles.
I actually have some questions. I want to talk more about you know, what, I guess where we could take the, you know, I find like your chapter is so great at laying out what I think is a very complex position in the state debate, and one that I find kind of like formally and theoretically very compelling, and yet like really struggle with politically because it just feels very, you know, like as with, you know, a fair amount of like Marxist work that's very compelling. You know, I mean, like that's just sometimes the challenge is like, you're like, okay, analytically, this is formidable as like a set of challenges, and it feels very hard to know like what you do or how. And I think that's particularly acute for me in thinking about, again, like the kind of climate urgency stuff, which I know you've also thought a lot about, and you know, how you try to approach that, like, okay, I find this analytically compelling, and yet like I feel like we like can we chart a way forward, or is it kind of lead to that kind of more potentially fatalist position? I guess if you have a theory, if you buy the kind of O'Connor second contradiction thesis, then there's a little bit more of an out. But I actually worry a bit that like the that like, you know, Jason Moore's recent work is kind of resting very hard on like this is you know, this is the epochal crisis, and like that's kind of the political mechanism for him. For example, Nancy Fraser has a crisis theory, but it's a little less, you know, she has more of a political argument in it. Anyway, I'm just curious to hear you think about that, because it's always been my struggle with this realm.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, lots to talk about here. I think I mean, I think the first thing to say is simply like I think that sometimes I feel that sometimes it's important just to sit with it. That like the mood at the end of a critique it's a bummer. And it's a common objection to form analytic theory that it's gloom and doom, or if you want to put it in a different register, that it's too structuralist, it's too determinist, or it's a different kind of determinism, even if it is not a sort of mechanicist determinism that we see in more traditional Marxist theories. And so at a sort of global theoretical level, I think what I want to say is I want to touch on Raju Das's distinction between structural theories of the state and class struggle theories of the state. And I know that it's not meant to be interpreted as a sort of like dichotomy, but I actually really want to press on that point and say that there can be no dichotomy. So in the traditions that I'm invoking in my chapter and the claims that I'm trying to articulate, it's really important not to see social forms as these sort of like ponderous structures that are just sort of there. They're the forms that are assumed by the real activity of concrete social individuals, but in turn they also go on to shape and mediate that activity. And so on the one hand, they're made. They're not found. They're made, and what can be made can be unmade. And so it's not a mechanical conception of history that's in play here. That's sort of like you're trapped within. Max Weber called capitalism an iron cage, and if we want, we can read that as a superstructuralist analysis, and that's not what I'm going for, and that's not how I see it. What I see is that at this moment, ours is a society that's dominated by social categories of our own creating, and it's a weird and inverted society where
our society is dominated by social categories of our own creating.
It's a society that's dominated by social categories of our own creating.
What are some of those social categories of our own creating? When he says our societies are dominated by social categories of our own creating, what does he mean? What are some examples? Hierarchies, gender, race. Yep. What else? Class. The gender binary. Yup. Gender is a big one. Yup. Oppressor versus oppressed is going to be the general theme. Gender, middle class, rich, poor, racial capitalism, gender binary, nationality. Yup. Owners. Yup. Parent and child. Yup. Exactly. Anything that can separate people into groups. That's a really good way to put it. When we say that socialists want to eliminate all hierarchies, they want to make everything equal, that means they want to eliminate all categories. Because it's in the creation of these categories, what they would call the artificial categories, that things become unequal. Does everyone understand that?
And it's a weird and inverted society where objects that are created by people come to dominate those people, and it's not simply a metaphor. It's a really weird society that we live in, where no one in particular is telling you to do this, but if you don't go out and get money, you don't eat. And like it's if you want to call that a structure, fine, but it's what it is it's, as I see it, it's the abstract domination of the particular social forms of social relations that arise out of historical activity. And I emphasize historical activity again because I want to stress that like these forms value the state, the value forms, commodities, money. These are they're not timeless categories. They're made and they can be unmade. And what I'm about to say, I find some people find it to be a cop-out, but I don't think that it's the task of the critique of political economy to deliver strategic proposals. I do think that it's the task to interpret struggles that are happening, and also to, hopefully to look for possible moments in the totality of capital where future struggles might erupt.
Hang on. No. I don't agree with this. Kurt, I don't agree with this. Do they want to eliminate all religions? Kurt says yes, the only religion is worship of the state. I've never heard them talk about this. Not in any great depth. So I think a lot of socialists are a-religious. They don't really care. But is there a proactive effort to abolish religion? No. They view religion as an organizing tool. They want to take over religion. They want to co-opt religion. They want to make it in their image. But, okay, well then show me a fucking clip. Show me a fucking clip of them saying it. I'll wait. Does anyone have any evidence of any real world far leftist saying this? That is a right-wing talking point. It is not something that I've seen reflected in what the left has actually said. What I have seen is the left has taken over churches, the left has co-opted churches, the left has taken over the Catholic Church, the left has taken over the Unitarian churches, the left has taken over the non-denominational churches, the left has taken over the Christian churches, the left has taken over the Baptist churches, the left is doing queer fucking theology in all of the churches. Just because they take it over doesn't mean they want to eliminate it. They're using it as an organizing tool. Exactly. There is no clip. There is no clip. You could have just stopped there. There is no clip. So can we please just stop? Can we please just stop? Like, honestly, guys, like the way this stream is going, I just want to end the whole thing because, like, I don't even know what to say anymore. I don't even know what to say.
Be learned from them, and how we can better understand the stakes and how we can better understand what it is that we're struggling against. What I like about the 2x2 chart in your chapter is that it does sort of like force these questions on what can otherwise often be seen as a very abstract, even sort of involuted exercise in critics' eyes, it looks like so much logic chopping. I do think that it's on most days, it's something that causes me to feel very pessimistic. That doesn't sort of diminish my anger, my horror at the urgency of capital-induced climate change. But I do think that.
Yeah, but I can't spread knowledge when people are just like not listening. Like that, I can't. It makes no. If people don't want to listen because they just want to like hear what they want to hear, they just want to use the talking points they want to use. Like, Nothing I do really matters, to be honest.
The claims that I'm making and the traditions that I'm reaching to, looking at for theoretical resources to build my arguments, they do force us to confront what we're up against, and like it's an incredibly steep climb. And I think that just means that it's incumbent on all of us not to give up thinking hard, give up attending to actual concrete struggles that are happening on the ground, and the task of interpreting these things and the task of learning lessons and collectively amassing knowledge and understanding is just never stops being important. Again, maybe this is a deeply unsatisfying answer. One thing I will say is that from the critical traditions that I'm drawing inspiration, it's just not the case that at the end of
what do you need?
A critique that they're going to discharge.
Sorry, my husband came in.
Policy positions or recommendations for institutional design, and we might think that perhaps that's a limitation. I'm going to stop there and see if perhaps we get. I suspect that I'll get asked more questions along these lines in the Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, I actually totally agree with like much and probably most, maybe all of it. Like, I think I agree. It's not the it's not the job of critique to sort of present the entire alternative or the program or anything like that. And I think it is extremely clarifying, even if often like stringently so. And and certainly we shouldn't be like developing analyses in service of political goals, which I think can be very distorting. And I feel like often like I'm sympathetic to some projects that like are kind of like you can see where they're reaching certain conclusions because I really want this thing to be like politically useful, and you're like, I feel you, but it's not. It can end up being ultimately I think it's not politically helpful to do that, and insofar as it's sort of like you're like wishfully thinking your way to an analysis. So I totally don't want to suggest like, well, if it sort of ends up somewhere.
Listen, guys, I'm going to be honest. I'm not feeling this stream anymore. I'm just not feeling it. It's been a really tough night. There's just been so much nonsense. I can't even. We're not getting a lot of good information from these two. So like, I'm gonna cut the stream short. I'm sorry. I'm just not feeling it. I'm just really not. I appreciate everyone that came out. I appreciate everyone that listened. I appreciate everyone that learned something. If you want someone to blame for this, blame the people who were disrupting the stream for the first hour that just sucked all my goddamn energy away. I have nothing left to give. There's not even really anyone watching. So I'm going to cut the stream short for tonight. Thank you for everyone who hung in. Thank you for everyone who tried. Thank you to everyone. I can't even with this bullshit. I cannot even. So I'm going to go. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. We'll see you soon. Bye.